Okay, this should be episode 70 of Summoning Insight, and as always, brought to you by Alpha Draft. And you know, on past episodes, I've actually used Monty as the butt of certain jokes. You know, I've used the Alpha Draft intro, kind of a mean way to sort of like poke at renegades and, you know, all that sort of thing. Which, by the way, now I've actually been informed is like totally inappropriate. And oh no, wait a second, this is actually a talk show where people make jokes. It's not actually like an official broadcast put on by the people who make the game and develop it. So it actually turns out I can do whatever I want here. So not hypocrisy, turns out. So anyway, the thing that I like about Alpha Draft the most, Monty, I've mentioned this many times to you before, is I'm actually known as one of the world's most precise predictors of matches in League of Legends. You know why that is, Monty? Because a little known discrepancy in most people's understanding of words is a lot of people conflate the word precision with accuracy. Now, what precision actually means is just that everything's very closely bundled together. So it's possible you can actually miss the bullseye of a target completely, but if all your shots go in the same area and miss, that's actually very precise. Now, your accuracy is terrible. Meanwhile, you can have accuracy where you hit around the ball, but it's not going in the same exact area. It's not very precise. So the key point is there, Monty, I was entirely correct. I'm one of the most precise predictors League of Legends has ever seen. So it would be very incredibly precise to go 6-0, but also going 0-6. Like I'm staying in that zone, motherfucker. I'm getting, like, even ones where it looks like it's easy to get, I still get it wrong. So here's where Alpha Draft comes in. On Alpha Draft, they don't care who wins the match. They don't care who wins the series. All that matters is that you precisely pick the people who are going to get the most points. So if you, like me, are shit at League of Legends, don't know much about League of Legends, and by the way, spoiler, that's all of you listening right now, including the Riot casters that tune in every now and then. Like, I know for the cameras, you guys look like you know, but everyone is shit, okay? So the key thing about Alpha Draft is, if you play there, you can win despite being shit. Now, again, I know that, again, some of the Riot casters are like, I know this. Like, what are you telling me about? No, for everyone else, though, the guys who are just fans, you don't have to actually know that much and you can win. So that's a pretty good commercial, I think. Okay, so this is episode 70. I'm Thorin, usual host. Today I'm in a hotel. It's the life I live. So my co-host for this week is same one as usual, Monte Cristo.
Has there ever been another one?
I don't know. But
can I be a co-host someday?
maybe one day. So how you doing, Monty?
Once people start caring about Taiwan, yes. So
okay.
Win another world championship, and then we can go there. I'm doing great.
Not. You've finally gotten over. You know, you had like a little bit of a bee in your bonnet. I feel like, you know, things. Was that a hard day, Monty? Were you feeling a bit stressed that day? What was going on exactly? You got a little bit triggered, right?
Yeah, I did. I don't like my team referred to certain ways on official broadcasts.
Okay. By the way, you didn't actually say this in your video about that whole thing about where they slipped up and said renegades. But here's the key thing to note. I think someone actually distilled it into the best essence of like a single like couple of sentences to explain the point. So people can debate all they want, Monty, as to whether you on this show or on other things or analysis desk should have a joke about things. That's up for other people to debate, right? I don't think it's the case.
Sure.
But someone did make the point like this, okay? You would never, no matter how much banter is allowed on the NBA, no matter how much banter is allowed in certain sports, at no time would an actual commentator ever tell you, and by the way, like, after the break is coming up a game between Chelsea and Manchester City. That would never
exactly.
happen.
That's what I said.
That's
what I said in
possible...
my video. I said the Golden State Warriors versus the LA Losers.
Yeah.
Like, that would never fucking happen.
Like that, the whole point is, you can debate every other aspect, but let's be real, that would never happen. Not only that, by the way, if me and Monty were somehow commentators at the edit, we would also never say that, by the way. We would never use that moment to, like, slam a little bird in on the fucking... Like, people aren't going to come back after the break, are they, for a start?
My favorite part, and again, I do think it was a mistake, but it's like... People are like, it's just banter. It's not banter. The definition of banter is going back and forth with somebody else. You know what I mean? Like... It's not banter just to, like, drop a non sequitur one-liner and then walk away. That's not what banter is. That's not the definition of banter.
Sure. So, here's the thing, Monty. I've actually just tricked all the viewers, because what I did there is I did the intro, I started out, and then it sounded like we were talking about NALCS for a little while there. I tricked them. I made them feel like we were getting into that. So I just have to inform everyone now, before I introduce our guest, that at no point in time on this episode will we actually refer to the results of the NA or EULCS playoffs. And
Sorry, boys.
Not because I was wrong, by the way, but because Clement just doesn't watch it. And also Monty hasn't got a chance to watch the VODs of the games yesterday. So at no point...
At any point this weekend, I've seen a few of the games, like when I was awake and watching them, but I was in Jeonju all weekend because they did this for Champions. We had to go down there to kind of do a road show for the last week of Champions. So I just haven't even been like home to watch the VODs or anything like that. I've been out stuck in Jeonju. So I've seen a few of the games from some of the series, but I haven't actually completed it. So I don't have an opinion that I can really give in an honest and valid way about those series as a totality right now, so we can't really discuss them.
So yeah, basically, for anyone watching now, we won't be discussing that. This episode will be about LMS, which Clement's an expert of, and LCK, basically. And on a future episode, which will have an extra special guest that I won't reveal, we'll go fully over all these playoff matches, and we'll lead into the other playoff matches, all that good stuff. So, unfortunately for you guys, if you don't care about LCS, you just have to tune out now. But I have to inform you, I've already got your view. Like, you've been on long enough.
No. If you don't care about LCS, this is the show for you. If you don't care about LMS or LCK,
if you only care about LCS, then it's not a show for you. Yeah. But like as they once said in a rap song, you can't unsuck a dick and you can't unclick this view. So, I mean, listen, guys, if you could unclick a view, I'd have no views, would I? But I've got tons of views. I've got views like a motherfucker. So I believe that particular mechanism has worked in my favor before and will again. But by the way, Monty, just as a little aside, when I was like totally wrong and I like predicted that Team Liquid would lose to they would lose to NRG, and like I made all those wrong predictions in that video. About 2 hours after my prediction was wrong, that video just got like 70k more views. So. Guys, it really hurts to be wrong. I know. Like, basically, it's like someone just knocked on the door. I was like, "Oh, hello there, sir." He's like, "Skriller agent for Mr. Thorin." And I was like, "Really? What's going on? I thought I lost that game." It's like, "No, you still win. You win no matter what." I was like, this reminds me of when I play at Alpha Draft." Sick little segue there. Right, so now we're into the episode. So see, you didn't know it much. I modeled my whole career off Alpha Draft. So
I think I think what we should do is just intentionally make horrendously wrong predictions from now on, because whenever we do that, whenever we make a wrong prediction, the fans will just link the YouTube VOD to try and make fun of us inside of the comments on like any Reddit thread. So really, we actually make more money by being wrong than we do by being right. Because I don't see people linking these YouTube VODs when I make an insanely right prediction like the one that I made with TSM versus
It's way less likely it's going to happen. I'm telling you, it's way less likely.
So you would think that even that TSM Immortals prediction I made, which was, by the way, spot on, not in terms of the game score, but in terms of the reasons why Immortals would lose. I don't see anybody even though that was an upset, even though that was a spot on prediction. I don't think that it's going to get anywhere near as many views as if I had predicted exactly the opposite way. People just love to shit on other people, man. What can you say? It's a messed up world out there. It's a messed up world.
Exactly. In that post-apocalyptic world, Monty, I'm the ringleader. I'm the one with the biker jacket. Okay, right. Clement is our guest for this episode. His name is Clement Chu. As I always mention, real alias, Bummer. Was it Bummer 2000, right? Wasn't that
Bummer
it, Clement?
2000, yes.
Oh my god, you're not going to let that go.
No, because it's brilliant. That's wicked, mate.
You did it to yourself.
That also sounds like one of those dodgy, like, early 2000s names in, like, a fucking, like, live Jasmine chat or something. Like, Bummer 2000. Nice donation.
I was in 5th grade. Like, 9/11 didn't happen then, and I was young and innocent about the world. I got my first email account. What? I didn't even know what bummer meant.
Okay. Well, that's...
I was going through puberty. I just liked bums, and I was like, bummer. Like,
okay, so it's gone down a path I didn't expect here. Back on track, boys. Let's rein it back in. Rein it back in. Let's get a little bit too revelatory there.
Clement Chu, bum enthusiast.
Exactly. So, Clement, as we mentioned on the past episodes, he's been on a number of other episodes. He's perhaps best known originally for writing articles about, I think it was the slow push was the term, back on World Elite, sort of pioneered that style of minion / wave control and lane swaps of World Elite. And then later on he worked as an analyst / coach for NIP, and now he works in the LMS where he does commentary in a language most of us don't understand, some variant of Chinese. I don't even know, mate. I don't Chinese. It's all Chinese to me, right? So he does stuff in the LMS, and here's the problem, Clement. People don't even watch the LMS in English, mate. So aside from being on this show,
it doesn't exist.
They need me to tell you all this shit. So
yeah,
right. So let's just start out here, Clement. Before we get into all the nitty gritty. So last time most people in the West would have had the LMS in their mind at all was obviously Worlds, and at Worlds, 2 LMS teams made it to the round of 8. Now, Flash Wolves actually obviously had at least a chance in their matchup, but AHQ had to play SK Telecom, who only dropped 1 game in the final anyway, so it's pretty much an impossible task there. First question for you. At Worlds itself, who was actually the better LMS team, AHQ or Flash Wolves?
Flash Wolves, for sure. I think in scrims they were doing a lot better than AHQ were doing. You should have seen how like the teams were getting scrims, because if you go to Worlds and you look how the teams interact, it's like a little microcosm for how society interacts with each other. They see you're a shitter in scrims and they stop scrimming you, and you have to go around begging people, and people start canceling on you. So that was what AHQ was like basically on the first week. They lost to C9 and everybody started canceling, and after Flash Wolves lost to Pain Gaming, everybody started canceling. But in that time period, I think Flash Wolves was the better team, and the reason I'm saying this is because I think AHQ had a very bad meta for them. If you look at the meta, top lane was mainly about bruisers. You had Riven, you had what's the other champion? Yeah, Fiora being like the top champions at that role, and I predicted that Ziv would be able to master these, and he would be able to use his mechanical skill to step up, but really he turned out not that familiar with these champions. He kind of sticked to the take initiator role, and the meta season 5 was a lot about lane pushing. I think Westor was useless in a lot of the games, to be honest. He just got pushed in most of the time. There's nothing really he could do, and if you look at the compositions they were running, it would have been better if he could pick up a Lulu champion. Instead, he kind of stuck to assassins, and he really wasn't that useful, I'd say.
And Cho'Gath.
Yeah. It's really bad. So the meta itself was really bad for AHQ. I think they still could have gone to semifinals if they didn't face SKT. Like, I was sitting on the analyst desk there, and like Shox was asking me after game 2, like, what can AHQ do to win a game? And I was just coming up completely blank.
Who could they have beaten then? Which teams do you think they could have beaten?
I think they could have beaten EDG, considering their form.
Sure.
Yeah, EDG had some really weird player.
They were that weak ass group, and EDG even almost lost to Bangkok Titan. So I think we could agree that perhaps AHQ could have beaten EDG. I think that's probably pretty likely.
Yeah, I think there was a high chance they would do that. Like at the time, I didn't think it was possible because the two teams know each other very well, but I think they had some problems getting their top laners back. It's just some communication issues I heard, and they were really in very bad shape coming in, arguments among the team and stuff like that. So I think AHQ had a very good chance against them. If AHQ faced Flash Wolves, that was another possible scenario. I think they would have gone to semis as well. The matchup traditionally between AHQ and Flash Wolves is that Maple wins mid, and AHQ wins bot with Ann and Albus, but Ziv just crushes Stake, so they would probably have won that one as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, by the way, they couldn't have played EDG because they finished second, so they would have had to play. They could only play KT, couldn't play Fnatic because they're in the same group. They could only play KT, SK Telecom, or Flash Wolves. So yeah, Flash Wolves is an obvious one because it's a domestic matchup. So Monty,
KT they would have won as well. Yeah.
Whoa, Monty, you think AHQ would have beaten KT Rolster in a best of 5?
No.
Discuss.
Seriously, no.
Discuss. You're talking to Monty. What the fuck are you talking about? Seriously, no. Unless like Faker's on the other team, he's going to say no, isn't he?
I think they could have contained someday.
I mean, I think that with the way that KT played very disappointingly, I think, in the quarterfinals. But I think KT just had better coordination than AHQ overall and was playing the map better at that particular tournament. But I do agree that Someday was really disappointing in their quarterfinal match versus the Tigers. So perhaps it would have been closer.
Okay, what did you think of the?
No, I think AHQ would have won.
What did you think of the LMS teams at Worlds, Monty?
I think they did really well. I think we've been surprised by the LMS teams throughout 2015. They obviously did did quite well at MSI, better than expected until they hit EDG and got smashed. And I don't think anybody expected the Flash Wolves to get out of that group, except for you, Clement. I know you predicted it, to get out of that group with CLG and the Tigers. But they ended up in first place, and they 2-0'd the Tigers in what were some terrible games of League of Legends. And Flash Wolves should never have won those games. But yeah, I think that they showed at least this last year that they are a region that is definitely more of a threat on paper than North America is. I mean, what else can you say?
So okay,
and this year, and to be fair, like I'm glad Clement's here because I haven't watched the most LMS. I've seen a few games here or there this season. Mostly, I've just waited until like the top teams were matching up against each other to watch, and then obviously I'll be watching the playoffs this weekend just to get a feel for it. But it is, I think perhaps we should take a moment here because we've been talking a lot without actually describing what AHQ and the Flash Wolves are right now. Who are almost certainly going to be the finalists considering their records in the regular season and the fact that they, unless you really think that there's an upset that's brewing from TPA or Machi, you think?
I think TPA actually has a good chance. Yeah.
Okay. But I think they were doing some interesting things over there, and I'm not sure a lot of our viewers are going to know this, but we should talk about AHQ and kind of their identity as a team and like the Chowie Westdoor thing, because that's actually really interesting what they do. And can you like describe that at a basic level?
Okay, so if you guys want more info on this, I wrote an article on Low Esports about it. So basically about the player rotations they had this season. So what their AHQ, they got a huge blockbuster trade. They got Chowie from TPA, who was a runner-up MVP, played pretty solid last season, mainly on like poke and control mages. So they brought Chowie in, and there's like basically two reasons for it. They wanted to pressure Westdoor a little bit to pick up more champions, and they wanted a player that could play more things in an international competition. Like Westdoor was always fine domestically, but they wanted a better shot at international tournaments. So they put Chowie in, and the way they use him is that they put Chowie on purple side, and on blue side they have Westdoor in. And the reason they do this is because on blue side, traditionally like ban picks have always been easier on blue side. People get less target bans. Purple side has to deal with all the strong meta picks. Like in this meta, they'd have to ban out Echo or Rise or something like that. So there's less target pressure on Westdoor, and he can kind of just pull out his assassins easier. And for purple side, you usually just see Chowie go with something safer, a Victor or a Lux, and he picks that pretty early in the draft. So then they can flesh out and bring their like last picks in for Ziv or for Ann maybe, and they get stronger laning matchups there. So they've been playing this most of the season up until the last week, where they decided to go with Chowie the last two games in a row, and that's the first time has happened all split. And it's really kind of the big question coming into playoffs is who AHQ is actually going to go with. Because they've been telling the fans and on FB that they are not going to continue this mid-player rotation into the playoffs in a BO5 series. So I think that's a really interesting point to look out for.
So here's the problem.
Why would they do that? Why would they do that after having the entire season of this one set game plan?
Well, I think that they want better continuation, and they want to like have an easier time practicing with the team. You have very limited scrim time in general, so they really wanted to lock down on one player. Plus, if you think about it, for international tournaments, you're only allowed to bring 6 players, so they might be considering getting RD, who's another AD carry, onto the roster.
He played in the last week last week in the games that didn't matter when AHQ already locked up number 1.
Yeah, exactly.
So Clement, here's the problem, is that when they did the Westdoor blue and Chowie red. Was that the way around it was? I think that was the way
Yeah,
around
Westor
it.
blue,
Yeah.
Chowie red.
So whenever they did that, first of all, it worked really well. Like, they were winning all their games. Secondly, it actually is very difficult for the opponent, because you know you're going to have to play two totally different teams. Because the key thing to make the point of is when they had Westor in, they played around Westor's strengths. They gave him an assassin. Westor's not some sick laner, so they would just group up really early and go around the map. When they played with the Chowie and he was playing poke or control mages, he just farmed up. They all farmed up, and then they would play like more safer traditional style. So here's the part I don't understand is, that seems like you've actually gotten the most out of what your gimmick there. You're actually getting all the benefits of it and very few negatives. Well, here's the problem is, like, when you actually look at it, the good thing about the Chowie move, even if you think that Westor was better or whatever someone thinks, is that it covered Westor's failures, his weaknesses. But actually, when you look at them in the game, I think as a team, they actually looked better when they had Westor in. Like, I think Chowie's a better player, but they didn't play as well around Chowie, or they weren't as dynamic as they have when they have Westor. In some ways, his weaknesses force you to actually play as a team. You can't just leave him on his own. So, from what you're saying here, which do you think they're actually going to go with if they pick one?
If they picked one, I think their stated goal has always kind of been for Chowie. I think if you look at why they're doing this, why did they sign Chowie in the first place? It's to cope with international tournaments, and I think they will try it out, at least in playoffs. The thing is that Westor is such a unique player that he's kind of hard to replace. He's not the best laner for sure, but he's always going to be there in the fights before the other mid laner. That's something that he's consistently been doing for his entire career, and you can see that as in total, like, AHQ farms a lot less when they have Chowie, and they roam a lot more. They get to places faster.
You mean Westor, yeah.
So on average,
you just said Chowie there, but you meant Westor, right?
Oh yeah, sorry.
They farm a lot less
Westor,
when they have
like,
Westor, sure.
So on 20 minutes, like, the team as a general, like, they farm like 50 CS less when they have Westor, and they just go to places and fight more. I'm predicting they're gonna go with Chowie. Actually, I think that's the reason they subbed him in for both games on the last week, just to test if that was going to do well.
So okay, here's the question then. So for international play, what is the actual rule, Monty? Like, in international play, can you actually just sub someone during a series?
Yeah, of course.
Or do you think you have to announce in advance that you?
No. You can sub it during the series. You have like 5 minutes after the end of the previous game to announce your substitute is going to go in according to Riot rules. So yes, you can. I mean, that's why we saw like Easy Hoon playing a couple games in the semifinals of Worlds, and the Faker coming in for game number 3.
But you have to announce like beforehand like that. You can't just put them in the game and they're suddenly just there for the opponent.
Right.
Right, well, here's the question then, Clement. Do you think that what they do is try to make the Chowie lineup work, but then you have Westor as almost like a pocket pick player? Like, you put him in if you just want to play Zed or something like that, which obviously can be played in the current meta. Do you think they'll keep using him, or is this like the transition where if it works with Chowie, it's kind of like his era ends, the Westor era, and we go into just the Chowie era?
I don't think they're going to drop Westor anytime soon. I think he's too much of an asset at the current point. I think they might try playoffs with purely Chowie, but I don't think they just completely transition out of Westor. I think Westor has proven this split that there is something irreplaceable about him, and I think mentality and shot calling wise, Westor is still a big part of the team. What like a lot of people don't see, especially Western fans, but Westor is known for having this killer personality. Like, he gets extremely upset when the team loses, and that's always part of the reason, like, why I feel like AHQ has played better with him, because he will hold his teammates to a higher standard than say Chowie, who was a relative newcomer on the team. So I think there's definitely like some team dynamics going on there, where they're not gonna just purely transition out of Westor. And I don't think Chowie has proven that he's as capable on certain assassin picks compared to Westor. Like, for instance, Chowie went for a lot of Zed picks this season, and they just weren't that good. Like, Chowie is really good on stuff like Azir, but his assassin play is just, I think it's pretty mediocre, and he kind of admits that himself. So they're going to keep him on the lineup.
That's always weird to me about the fact that they're going to decide between the two, though. I actually thought this is one of the few instances I've ever seen where it actually made a lot of sense to keep both and keep rotating them, because they really do just like cover the whole possible meta of mid-champions, but they don't really have much crossover.
Well, I mean, they don't, though. The thing about Westor is that he has his few champions, and he plays them over and over and over again. And what's great about him is that, when you have him on the blue side, he can, of course, just play blindly into a number of matchups with his, signature fizz and whatever, Twisted Fate Zed, that kind of stuff. But he never really diversifies. He just plays the same shit all the time. Like, he doesn't diversify his champion pool that much. Over the years, we haven't seen him really learn a lot of new champions. It's mostly just being really good at blind picking those same champions into the matchups over and over again.
Sure, but that's what I'm saying, by having the two. So you have Westor to do that end, and then Chowie's going to play all the other sit, with all the control mages. He's going to play everything, Azir, whatever you want.
I think Westor is just such a fascinating player, because he's like the only player who is that way, right? He can hold up against international mid laners playing these same champions, whether they're meta or not, and he will just blind pick them, and he will find ways, even if he gets crushed in lane, he will find ways to affect the game and make plays. That's really impressive.
Do you have any explanation as to why that is, or some theory, Clement? Like, what is his? Why does he have this slightly unique mojo in that sense?
He just has like some innate ability with certain champions. Like, I don't think it's terribly easy to explain. And he also plays these champions very, very often, like regardless of meta. He has been trying to diversify, though. This is something that we've seen this season, where he's trying to pick up the Lulu. Lissandra, and even picked up the Azir a little bit. So he's definitely trying to... I think he is kind of feeling the pressure from Chowie. So he's trying to diversify, but so far the results haven't been as well, I think.
I've also got to give Westor credit in as much as... Like, I've always mentioned on this show the things that you've always told me as well, which is that he obviously has these huge flaws, and even though he's the big name star of AHQ, actually you look at the last AHQ, the one that was really good, they didn't play around him as like the star. He was almost like the pawn role, like a weird wildcard side topic that everyone else might focus on, but really you were winning the game from top and bot lane. So what's interesting about him as a player is, I'll have to give him credit in this sense, in all the international competitions I've seen him play in, he's never going to be the best mid laner, and as we're saying here, he might just get shit on in lane. But he's quite a clutch player. He always will perform under pressure. It feels like he never gets broken in that way,
Yeah. It's definitely like he is the heart of AHQ. Like, if you talk to the players and who they think is the most vital player in like the team mentality or atmosphere sense, a lot of times they will say it's just Westor.
So okay, the other player on AHQ, which is a big name, is obviously Ziv, the top laner. Now, coming into Worlds last year, I actually had 2 LMS players in my top 20 that I did as the response to LoL Esports. I had Ziv and I had Maple, because when you watch the regular season play, these were 2 obviously very good players. Now, the Maple one, okay, that obviously worked out. It looked great, like it looked like you knew what we were talking about. But the Ziv one, as you kind of mentioned a little bit, the meta didn't really fit. He was kind of underwhelming at Worlds, actually. Like he didn't seem like the monster that he was in LMS.
Yeah, I think... I gave him too much credit a little bit for being good mechanically. I thought he would be able to go into like the new Bruiser, the Juggernaut champions, but that didn't really happen. But this season we've seen a continuation of good play. He leads like a lot of stats, DPM, KDA, GPM. They're all the best for top laners, and he's really been more focused on his tank initiator champions. I honestly think that Ziv will be the MVP this season once more, and if you look at Ziv's legacy, I think he's going to be one of those. We're going to think of him as like the best low econ top laner to play League. I think he's just great on those initiation champions, and this time around in MSI it's Maokai season again, so I think we can expect great things from him.
Okay. I mean, by the way, Ziv's Legacy sounds like an amazing fucking like Amiga game from the 90s or something. That's like like some sort of puzzle game with like point and click sci-fi aspects. I'd play Ziv's Legacy for sure on my 3.5-inch floppy disk. Monty, what do you think of Ziv?
I mean, again, like I haven't seen the most of the LMS this season, but he's been solid in the games that I've seen. I certainly don't have enough of a perspective to say he should or should not be MVP of the entire season, right? But he's definitely been solid. He's been solid at all the international events. Yeah, I mean, he's looked good. The entirety of AHQ, I think, is surprisingly good. I got a little bit of a different flavor from AHQ because I watched, obviously a few of their games versus TPA or Flash. Because, like I said, I tend to just watch the premier matchups. So the thing about LMS is in their double round robin, Flash Wolves and AHQ played very early in the season, right? So I watched that.
Yeah.
And then went for a while. Then I'm watching AHQ TPA, and I'm like, oh wow, these games are pretty good. And then I see the Flash Wolves TPA games at the end of the season. And those games are terrible because they don't mean anything, and you can tell the teams don't actually care who is going to win these games, and they play substantially worse than when I've seen them previously play in the middle of the season. So I'm really looking forward to these playoffs because I feel like I was really disappointed by the last meaningless AHQ Flash Wolves matchup. Whereas some of the AHQ TPA games that I saw a couple weeks earlier were quite entertaining.
Yeah, I think TPA HQ, this set was probably the best set of the LMS this season. So if you want to check it out, it
was good.
TPA versus HQ round 2.
I thought TPA played really well, and in that series, you could really see both teams were making very smart, aggressive calls. They were reacting really well to each other in terms of one team would do something, one team would immediately follow up with a counterplay, and so it was a really tight series. I thought it was very well played from both sides.
For this season, I think the big issue from me about AHQ is that they kind of play to their opponent's strengths. So they'll have these really horrible games against MSE, against XG or CG, the bottom feeders of the LMS, and they just fail in lane. And the only way they pull out is they just play these amazing team fights, which is one of their core strengths anyway. But then you see them against playoff teams, and this split against playoff teams, I think they've only dropped one game so far against Flash Wolves at the end, and they've been really good. A huge improvement, I think, is their macro game calling. A lot of times in the previous season, they would not give up dragon fights whatsoever. But if you look this season, especially against the set against TPA, they were actually playing very smart. They would call dragon, they would lure TPA into the pit, and then they would rotate around and go mid and try to push the mid lane. That's something they really haven't been doing in the previous seasons. And I think it has a lot to do with their relationship with EDG. They've gone a lot more public this season about scrimming with them. They've gone to Shanghai to train with them. They have Bebe, who's training with EDE right now in the LSPL. And you could see that macro game starting to really rub off on them.
By the way, just for anyone, again, who doesn't know this, he doesn't mean Bebe, the old AD carry of TPA. He means literally someone whose name is spelt B-A-Y, B-A-Y, right?
Yeah, B-A-Y,
just because people are going to assume, mate, I have to clarify these things. Okay, because that shitter would never be training with EDG, so forget about that. So, Legend, of course, great feature by Riot Games. Enough of that. So, here's the question. Clement, throughout the first round robin, AHQ was unbeatable, basically. They were not dropping anything. Even at the end of the split, where they tied 3 games, they only lost 3 games out of 28 that they played. So this is unreal levels of dominance. Are they head and shoulders above the other LMS teams, though?
No. No, not this split. If you look at their stats, in the previous season, they used to have the best first dragon, best first tower, all the barons, and they had extremely high KDA. But this split, because they were trying to fit Chowie into their own meta, and they've been trying out different things with different composition, especially when they're running Lulu or Lissandra with Westor, their gameplay has actually significantly declined. At this point, I would even venture out to say that TPA might have a good chance against AHQ, or I wouldn't be terribly surprised if Flash Wolves would be able to pull out an upset this playoffs. I think a huge problem with them, and with a lot of other teams, is that they're trying to change their team system. In the previous splits, they played a very predictable style. They were going to try to win mid with the 3v3, and was really good laner. They would leave Ziv alone, and they would try to roam Westor. But this season they've been trying to play around mid a lot more. So you've been seeing like Ann playing more like safe-ish laners. He's been playing a lot of Ezreal lately. So they try to get a safe lane bottom, and they try to focus more resources into the mid lane and try to carry from there, try to like fit Chowie into their playstyle. But that really hasn't been looking as clean, to be honest. They still look better when they're playing with like the Westdoor style, where they just go ham on like early skirmishes and stuff. And another thing is that I think Mountain has been really up and down this season. Like, we didn't expect Mountain to actually come back into to play the spring split at all. He had like a horrible problem with his hand, and somehow it got fixed in China. So he comes back, becomes a new man, and starts carrying AHQ back again. But this season, he's really been lackluster at times. His skirmishing ability has been called into question a lot. I think it has to do with the meta a bit. The previous season, he could just get away with like playing Rek'Sai, playing Sejuani, playing these tank champions, and he could survive a long time when he was invading. But this split, you look at Kindred, Graves, and Nidalee, they can't really play that style. So overall, I think AHQ has actually declined in their domination of LMS, even though the stat line, I mean, even though the scores don't show it that much.
So, okay, the other team, aside from AHQ, is obviously always Flash Wolves. It's always between the two of them who the better team is in LMS. Now, what I don't understand really is, yeah, Flash Wolves still have a good record overall, but they've had more issues this season, right?
Yeah, they had a lot of issues at the start of the split, where they lost 4 games when they were playing with Breeze. I think Breeze is a pretty good AD carry. Individually, he's probably a lot better than NL, but the problem
NL
with that Flash
is terrible.
He's not. Well,
Come
he
on.
works in the Flash system.
Does he?
Individually, I don't think he's that good.
The thing is, like, the discrepancy in skill between their bot lane, like, Sword Art is really good. I love watching Sword Art play, and NL is pretty bad. The amount of times, like, Sword Art has to bail NL out of, like, ridiculous situations is too much. Too much, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that point. Like, my biggest criticism of Flash Wolves this season is that they haven't been willing to test out new players enough. Like, Breezes came up, played 4 games, lost all 4 of them, and they immediately sent him to play in the Challenger series. I think for Flash Wolves, the spring split really isn't that important. To be honest, like,
well, at least we're in the post stake era now, which a lot of people might not even know. Where is he coaching them now?
Yeah, he's the coach for Flash Wolves right now.
Okay.
Like, you can see him in the band pick section.
So here's the thing, Clement. There's a question that no one asks, which is really confusing to me. So anyone who's watched LCK this season knows that the only reason why CJ is relevant is because they got this guy Kramer as their AD carry. Now, he used to be the backup AD carry of Flash Wolves. And yet at Worlds, they only used him in 1 game, like a game that really didn't matter, basically. And that's like it. I think it was a CLG game, actually. I guess that did matter. But they used him for 1 game, and they didn't really use him otherwise. They stuck with NL. And so they could have Kramer in that lineup right now. And now he's off, like, rocking it completely in LCK. What went on with that? Why didn't they keep this guy? Why didn't they use him as their starting AD carry?
Like, he was just not... he was uncontrollable. Like, you have to... If you have Kramer in your lineup, you have to play with him as kind of like your core carry. And that was never going to happen.
Kind of the double lift of the Taiwanese region.
Yeah, because... like, I think it does have a lot to do with communication barriers in-game, but if you know Kramer, you know he has a knack for building these really weird items. We did an interview with him, and we asked him, like, how do you pick what items you buy? And he just gave us, like, well, I just buy whatever item that I have the gold for, basically.
Okay, so, Monty, he literally is like a different variant of a double lift. This is the sort of shit where if you're any sort of coach or analyst, that's like you're triggered instantly when you hear that, right? Like, well, I mean, I had 1,100 gold, so I just went with this. Like, oh god, please no. I love that. It's brilliant. Keep going.
To CJ's credit, they have been playing entirely around Hermes, like or around Kramer. That has been their entire. Sorry, Hermes is their old AD carry. Around Kramer this entire season, and that has been proven very effective for them in in certain ways. Obviously, they have a lot of rookies on the team. They ended the season in 8th place, so you can debate how successful it's been, but it's been doing okay for them, and they've actually gotten wins where perhaps they shouldn't have. And they were also a victim of, as the meta shifted and everybody started to play a little bit more fast-paced, like the Tigers, they couldn't just stall out the game until 43 minutes and win with a super fed Ezreal anymore. So they did better at the beginning of the season than they did in the second half.
So
no, they did about the same, actually.
In line with that, Clement, was the Kramer lineup just not as good as the NL lineup of Flash Wolves?
Yeah, I think it was strictly worse.
Okay.
It was pretty obvious in like their team play. Like they couldn't control when Kramer was going to push a wave out or he was going to not push it. And if you look at the item builds, a lot of times it didn't make sense. Kramer would try to play like split push, and he would go maybe like Wit's End on Vayne or something like that when they needed more team fight damage. And for just looking at the champion pools, the way Flash Wolves play team fights is they actually use NL as a bait. Like, they have NL on these really long-range champions. They funnel a lot of gold on him, so he does a lot of damage. It's pretty typical for NL to have an item advantage over the enemy AD carry. And they use him like kind of a bait where the enemy team has to deal with NL because he's doing so much damage. And they kind of leave their own AD carry exposed so Maple can go in and assassinate the enemy AD carry. So that's the kind of team dynamic they play around. But when you have Kramer, it doesn't really work that way. Kramer doesn't play as far back as, say, NL would. Like, a lot of times when he was on Flash Wolves, he would be picking Vayne, and the team would really have to go all in the same time that Kramer did. And that's not really the Flash Wolves team fighting style. They want to kite back a little bit.
Well, it's also hard with the language issue.
Yeah, definitely. And that's been a general thing about LMS this split, actually. We've lost a lot of Korean players. We let Gugur go, who used to be Lupin on TPA.
Yeah, Gugur.
Gugur, sorry. Sorry about that. Yeah, Gugur. And we let go of Republic, who's playing in the LPL right now on EPA. And the general issue with the Taiwanese teams and the Korean players is that, first of all, it's a question of scale. The LMS just didn't have the cash funds to really go for the top-tier Korean players when you're next to China. And the second thing is, when these Korean players came in, a lot of the infrastructure they didn't really have the money to spend on like the translator or the infrastructure to get these Korean players settled into a working team environment. I think it was more or less the same issue in China last split, where you could hear like Sensao say in the casts that the Chinese teams thought that all the Korean players needed was kimchi and they would function the same way they did in Korea. But I know that sounds a little racist, but I'm just like going with the direct.
It's just like hilarious that they believed that. That's all.
Yeah, that's actually what they said a lot, and I think in LPL they're starting to wake up to that. Like, Korean players don't function the same as they did in LCK when all you do is just buy them a plane ticket. You actually need the Korean coaches. You need the infrastructure there.
Okay.
And that's why I think EDG
I feel like we've made a breakthrough there, Clement. You hear that, Monty?
Huh?
The Korean players don't function the same way if you just buy them a plane ticket. You need like a whole infrastructure. You need like special translators. You need like people who understand them and can work with them. But here's the thing. It's kind of like if you let a little baby go, Monty, into the forest, it won't do very well initially. But if it just goes off into the wild and it gets, like a load of wolves find it, and then it might be raised by those wolves and become entirely feral, and then in its own way it'll have its own advantages. This is actually a metaphor for what's happened to Seraph here, Monty. And when it comes back to you, this savage beast that was once your baby, at that point you just turn it loose on the world. You don't try and bring it into your house and put clothes on it. You keep it like an attack dog, and you're like, release the Seraph, and it goes out and it just attacks some savages everywhere. See, it all worked out in the end, Monty. Your harsh, Spartan-esque approach to Seraph has turned him into a monster in the end. After all that heartache he had to go through. See, when he came back...
I just had to release him into the wilds of North America for long enough, Turns anybody into a monster, really.
Exactly. You smashed his heart so that he could never fear again. Now he only knows hate. He's basically Sith. He just turned into a Sith at this point. Like, okay. So anyway, Clement. So what was the point you were going to finish up there? It was about the Chinese teams.
Yeah. It's just the Chinese teams like coming to the same realization that the LMS teams did last split, is that you just can't shoehorn Korean players in. Like a lot of times, the teams would actually play better in a higher level when team play mattered more. They would play at a higher level when they had 5 players who could communicate with each other. So in the LMS this split, like the only Korean players left are Ole and Rokinia from HKE, yep. And both of them have been, kind of forced to learn Chinese a lot more than the previous Korean players did. I think that's just going to be a trend in the future, honestly.
And also, I think it works better when you have like a supportive type player have to be the guy who, in that scenario, like he's just going to adapt to the player he's playing with. Like the idea of having like an AD carry that can't speak to you is like, I could see where this could go wrong here. He's not just flashed into the middle of this fight, has he? We probably should follow up. Like that lag is not going to be a great feeling every time it happens.
Seriously though, the Korean players on HKE, like the communication barrier really bit them hard in the ass this season. I think you guys have seen like the post on Reddit where HKE loses.
Yeah, the ending with the base race.
Yeah. So we had the mic check of that, and the Korean players were actually shouting really hard. They were like Nexus, and like the Taiwanese players just didn't register it. And so they just.
Why can't they understand Nexus? What's right? Like, come on.
No, but to be fair, Monty, like he just said there, that's the problem with Koreans, isn't it? They can't say Nexus. Like I always say, I've made this joke before. I don't know if I've said it on this show though. It's my joke in real life that I always say. I say that I actually wanted to be an English teacher in Korea, but not because I have a love of English and I want to teach them like all this. I just want to. This is the only class I would teach Clement. I would say like, we're going to pronounce some words now. This word here, nice. And then they'd all go, nice-oo. And I'd go, no, you almost got it. You almost got it. In fact, you know what? It's not about what you have to add. All you have to do is subtract. Just take the oo off the end. So when they're nice, stop right there. Nice-oo. No, yeah, you did it again. See, at the end, you didn't stick the landing. Just cut off the oo. So if they'd have said Nexus, then everyone in it, oh my God, Nexus, yeah. But they're like, Nexu. They're like, who's Sue? And what the fuck's this got to do with anything? Like, I can understand. It's an easy mistake to make, Monty. You've got to put yourself in people's shoes. So, okay, here's my question, Clement. Like I said, even though Flash Wolves is the second team overall in the rankings, I don't think they've looked that great this split. So here's my problem, is that I told this story before, I think, where the reason why I put Maple in my top 20 for Worlds last year going into it is because I actually went to watch the LMS games purely to see what Toys was doing, because he had like his comeback season, and I wanted to see, was he a good player now, and, like, had he adapted to the years and years after when he'd been in TPA? And as I was watching his games, I just saw all the games they play against Flash Wolves, and I quickly discovered, like, wow, this fucking Maple guy's like the best mid laner in the whole league. Because unfortunately, I assumed most of the mid laners weren't good because everyone raved up Wistor every Worlds, people who didn't know what he was like as a player, and then I would watch and I'd go, this guy's all right, but he's like a one-trick pony, So the problem is, when I did that, I was like, wow, this Maple guy's unreal. Then I saw at Worlds he was very good. When I watch him now in this team, it seems like he's just like trapped. Like he's still sick, but that team's not that great around him. My dream was when I heard Westall might retire, I hoped Maple would go to AHQ.
It was probably a possibility of that, actually. I think they definitely tried to go after Maple. That would make the most sense.
Or, he goes to LPL or something like that, but instead he just stays with Flash Wolves. So what do you think of Maple and Flash Wolves overall?
Well, I think the reason he stayed was because there was such a strong sense of bonding with that team. Like, if you look at the personal history, what happened to Maple and the Gamia Bears was the team actually officially disbanded before they went to Worlds. So Flash Wolves actually picked him up immediately afterwards.
Okay. So
they have like a really strong bond, and that's why he didn't go to teams like NA or China, even though there was a lot of people asking for that. And for me, I'm not sure that was the best personal decision. Of course I'm glad Maple is still in the league, but the players are really young and they don't really know what cash means. So
what does you're gonna have to explain that concept? What do you mean they don't know what cash means?
Like they just don't view money as that important.
You do realize you're blowing everyone in the West's mind right now.
What? Why?
Money is the metric of life in the West, mate. I don't know if you're aware of this.
Yeah, but like these are kids that just
Okay.
they have their friends and stuff like that, so they probably didn't go over.
I mean, one of the things to note, as you're kind of implying here, is that Maple's still very young.
Yeah, he's extremely young.
How old is he? Like 18,
can,
17? What is he?
He's still 18 years old.
Okay.
Like he turned 18 during Worlds.
How convenient.
Damn, I didn't realize he was that young.
Yeah, he's extremely young. Yeah. So I think that's a huge thing about Flash Wolves going forward. Like they are a team that you can expect growth from year after year. If you look at, I think Sword Art is 19, Karsa is probably around that age as well. I think 19 as well. And they have 4 players this season that have been in the top 30 Korean Challenger ladder. And 4 of those players have been like under 20. So this is a team that's going to continue growing like 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line. Like, if they keep their roster together.
Sword Art has been a staple in the top of the Korean ladder for a really long time.
Yeah. And, like recently, Karsa broke top 10 as well. So
what's his ID?
I'm not going to say.
What the fuck, man?
How is that like private information?
Well, because they hide champions on certain accounts. Like, they don't play everything on the same.
So they're
accounts,
so slick. They actually even smurf, and their smurfs get into the top 10.
I guess
they do that a lot. They do that a lot. That's pretty common, actually.
CUZZ. That's my guess. Okay. Could be Give Love TOT too. Those are 2 junglers that are currently in the top 10 that don't have Korean names.
I'm not sure if he's top 10 now though, but he's been in the top 10 before. So.
Okay.
Yeah, like I think the Flash Wolves have a very good core moving forward, and if you compare that to AHQ players are like significantly older. Like Ziv has been almost 3 years down the line, and like Ann has been playing a lot longer as well. So you're really looking toward the future with Flash Wolves.
Like I still think Maple, he has to be like an MVP candidate, right? The guy's champion pool's insane.
Yeah. I think Maple would come really close. I still think Ziv would win out, just because. In terms of value, there aren't that many top laners that are competing with him.
Sure.
And as long as AHQ hold on to the contract for Ziv, I think they have a very good chance of winning LMS. If you look at the AHQ versus Flash Wolves matchup, their current top laner is MMD. And the last 3 times MMD has faced Ziv, he's been benched immediately afterwards. Like the games have been
that's a good sign then.
Been crushed so bad in Ziv's favor that they just bench MMD immediately afterwards.
Right. What I like about that, Monty, is like, great team camaraderie and everything. Like, he comes back to the huddle like, yeah, sorry about that, guys, but you win as a team, you lose as a team, get the fuck on the bench over there. Like, it's by the way, we've all agreed it's literally your fault. Like, get the fuck out the game. This guy's coming back in. Brilliant, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if you look about the Flash Wolves thing, even though Stake has moved to a coaching position, if you look at gold distribution and damage distribution, Flash Wolves really haven't changed that much. Like,
top laner still is starved.
Yeah, he's extremely starved. He gets 17% of the gold on the team, which is
Holy
pretty
shit.
low. Yeah, you look at the average top laner is around 20%. So what Flash Wolves does is that they let the top laner sacrifice a lot of farm early. They get a lot of that farm on Maple in the mid game, so he can carry a lot. And then in the late game, they get all of that farm onto NL, so he can get an item advantage over the other AD carry. The way that Flash Wolves likes to play is that they like to have you go for their AD carry rather than them like going into your composition.
Okay.
So to put that in perspective, because like obviously that stat needs to be for most people. Like I say holy shit, you say holy shit, but to put that in perspective for those of you LCS fans out there, the lowest percentage that any top laner in the NA-LCS gets is Lorlo from Team Liquid, and he is at 19.2%. So 17% is just ridiculously low.
Yeah, that's how Flash Wolves play, and like their analyst Food Wins has been public about that. He said that the reason Flash Wolves has such an edge over other teams at certain points in the game is that their players are willing to give up farm to accelerate certain positions during certain times at the game. And they've been able to do that really well, especially with like Maple Assassins. If you look at his Zed, he usually hits that item spike a little earlier than the enemy mid laner, and he's able to have more of an effect on the just team fights.
And you think they make it work though? Like you're saying, the top lane has problems running against Ziv, but in general, he can handle being super low econ. Like literally,
Yeah.
forget low econ. He's like poverty line econ. Like, man alive, how's this guy like welfare stamps top laner?
He would like qualify for food stamps. Like that's how low it is. That is an absolutely ridiculous statistic.
Yeah, but also it's important to know that Flash Wolves in general, they play pretty low econ overall. Like, they're not a 3-lane team where, like, both teams are farming 3 lanes for 10, 15 minutes of the game. What they tend to do is that they tend to slow push a lane. They try to force the opponent to give up that farm by creating pressure elsewhere on the map at the same time. So if you look at Flash Wolves games, both teams, their opponent and themselves, they tend to have lower gold totals. They tend to have lower GPMs. And they do a lot of tower diving. Generally, they just slow push the lane, they try to force a tower dive somewhere, and they play very aggressively. So it's not as obvious when their top laner is starved compared to the normal meta when you watch them play, just because the gold distribution and like the GPM is incredibly slanted when they do it.
So okay, I have one question I have about this team, again to tie it to Worlds, is like the player who actually I thought was kind of a letdown at Worlds was Karsa. Because in that series against Origin, it seemed like he was the guy who made a lot of like he choked, or he just like made weird re-engages, and like he seemed to have some weird problems in that series. What do you think of him as a player now?
The problem with Karsa at Worlds was because Origin was playing all 3 lanes. The way Origin plays was that I think Soaz was the absolute. He got really lucky about the matchup against Stake. Because even though Soaz wasn't that strong individually, he could always split push against Stake, because Stake was just not going to put any resistance. So what Flash Wolves had to do to compensate for that was they had to put Karsa on Rek'Sai. And they funneled a lot of farm on Rek'Sai, and because Rek'Sai has the global and he could do the 1-3-1, he could sort of mitigate the pressure there. But really, if you look at Karsa as a player, what he's best on are champions that do high damage. He's best on Nidalee. Nidalee has been banned 21 games out of 28 games this split against Karsa. So he's an absolute
was banned like
killer.
all of last year too before Worlds.
Yeah. So because they were facing Origin, they couldn't let him take that champion, and he was forced into more of like a tank initiation role, which frankly I don't think has ever been Karsa's strongest suit. Like domestically, Mountain has always been considered the better jungler. That might sound pretty weird when you consider like the World Games last season, but the thing is that Mountain has always had better team fighting on tank champions than Karsa has, and I
think Karsa has better. I think Karsa has better pathing in an early game, though. That's the thing. Like I can see where you're coming from, but Mountain also tends to play champions that excel better in team fights. But Karsa, I think, presents more snowball opportunities early and has more intelligent pathing, generally speaking.
Pathing wise, the thing Karsa usually does is that he usually forgoes early camps. If you look at his pathing, he's typically behind in farm, and he ganks more often. The reason this works is because he has a very high chance of making those ganks successful, and that's kind of this playstyle he's been at. Karsa this split has had some trouble early on. He's really looked to play too forced in general. Like, I don't know, Flash Wolves was kind of a mess coming in early into the season, but later in the season, I think he's really picked up his stride with champions like Kindred, like Graves. Like, if you look at the meta right now, it doesn't really make much sense to play tank junglers because they have about the same survivability as stuff like Kindred and Graves. So I think he's getting back to his stride, and the meta is kind of favoring him again. And he's done significantly better in the second round.
Okay. So once you get past them, there's basically only TPA. Because even though obviously the Matchy team made the playoffs and HK Esports was like battling with them, those two teams weren't very good, right? I mean, Hong Kong Esports were terrible in most of the games I saw.
Yeah, HK is just... they have a lot of issues in that their Korean players are supposed to be like the team captains and making all the shots. But the problem is that the Taiwanese players don't understand what they're saying half the time. So they end up with like
Fucking
really
hell.
weird in-game calls and inexplicable ban pick phases. So
Okay, so TPA is basically the only other team aside from AHQ and Flash Wolves worth talking about.
yeah, I think Machi does represent kind of like a interesting newcomer, but let's just go into TPA first.
Okay, so when everyone looks at TPA, anyone from the West, the only two things they're going to know is, okay, Bebe's still alive, good to know. And then the other detail,
Yeah.
that actually might be interesting, is most people won't have seen TPA for a long time, because last time we saw them internationally would have been the like IEM in 2014, that one where they played in the group and they upset actually Gambit, if you remember. And at the time, Morning was a mid laner, but now he's gone back to being a top laner again. So what is TPA like as a team at the moment? I mean, they've always, in the last few seasons, hung around this level, like your third, fourth, like still been decent, but what are they actually like now?
TPA this season has the biggest thing about them is that they have a new mid laner. His name is Fofo. He was like the top on the Taiwanese ladder at 16 years old, and I'll just go on.
I'm just hoping that when they win games, they're just like, my Fofo, make sure all of your kids don't grow. 2-pack reference. Hit them up. Keep going, Clement. Keep going.
I love that song, by the way.
It's great, isn't it? It's great. Okay.
So TPA had Fofo as a trainee since he was 16 years old. He's been training with him for a long time, and he really gives the team a new sense of aggression. He really comes out kind of like a Maple. He plays a lot of champions, but he's really good on assassins. And the criticism we've had of TPA in the previous season is that they always veered towards having too much hesitation and then having to force an engage. I think it has a lot to do with like their Korean mentality. If you guys don't know, like they have Coach Sim, who came from Najin Black Shield, and he plays the way that Coach Sim directs the team is that they play a very, very slow pace, and they put down a lot of vision. Like they're known as the Korean team in the LMS because they don't go for like the 50-50 play. They always need like vision behind the lines, and they play generally very safe.
Aren't they the team that have like the best stats in terms of wards placed and stuff?
Yeah. They place the most pink wards out of any team. I think the KP the wards permitted is average of like 0.75. You have to multiply that by 5 across the team, but it's pretty high generally, and they get a lot of that from placing pink wards. They just have a very high threshold for playing safe, and that kind of affected the team mentality a little bit. What happened generally was that they didn't have the playmaker mentality on any of their older players, and when Fofo came in, you could see them having a more carry-oriented person, a person with a killer instinct that wanted to make plays, and when they funneled that in the right direction, they looked very scary. They have basically 2 cores this season. One core is that they play around BB. We call him BB anyway in Taiwan.
Okay. Because he's like an annoying little robot in a shit movie. So that shouldn't be a sequel. Just stick with the originals. Type Assassin Season 2. Keep going.
Yeah, so BB has had the highest damage share out of any player this split. He has played like Kog'Maw, Lucian, and when they go that route, they can have Fofo play the Lulu, play the Zillion, just keep him alive in team fights. I think TPA versus AHQ, again, that split, that series, if you watch the games, like their team fighting against AHQ was really, really tight. I really enjoyed that series. Lucian was a huge champion for BB. And the other route they go is that they just put BB on Ezreal, say, have a safe lane. We're going to focus on Fofo and let him carry. And Fofo plays some really sick LeBlanc and sick Zed. And they just kind of go into the Flash Wolves route. And when they go into the Flash Wolves route, what makes them slightly even better than the Flash Wolves is that they have stronger top lanes and bot lanes. In terms of laning phases, TPA usually wins all 3 lanes. Like all 3 of their lanes are up in CS or up in GPM. And on average, if they're winning by 5,000 gold at 20 minutes. So they've really replaced Flash Wolves as the best early game team and they're playing this style similar to Flash Wolves, but you can see they kind of have better parts in the top and the top and the bot lane.
So when we talk about the bot lane, hold on, because BB, here's a question, because a lot of people are going to remember like BB because he's a world champion, won season 2 Worlds, and he retired at the end of 2014 and then came back at the end of 2015. What was he doing for that year, and why is he back now?
With Assassin Snipers, like honestly, I think he just came back to get some fame. To get some recognition.
He won a world championship. Why does he need more fame?
Because he wants to find something to do with the rest of his life. Like, like once you retire, there's not that much to do. Like, I honestly think it was like hey guys, BB's back. Go watch stream and stuff.
We got bored.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. It was kind of that situation back when he was on Assassin Snipers. Like even the name Assassin Snipers is kind of just piecing together the teams he's been on. And trying to go like, hey, remember I exist and stuff like that. But this season, going back to TPA, he's really turned a corner. He practices a lot more. You can tell that his mechanics are in a completely different state than last season. Last season, he was basically only good on utility champions. He played a lot of Ashe, was good with the arrows, and that was pretty much it. But this season, he's playing a lot more high mechanical challenges. Like he's going back to the Ezreal, he's going back to the Lucian, and he's willing to play in the front lines in team fights and stuff like that. So, he says he just wants to get another championship. And interesting fact, like BB probably has won the most money out of League of Legends, just behind Faker and Bengi. So, maybe he figures that that's actually a better way to get cash, something like that.
Okay.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I'm gonna look that up.
I mean, when you consider he went to Worlds afterwards and the other TPA members didn't, it makes sense to a degree.
Yeah, and GPL was up before like even LCK or LCS was running.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, he's behind. So he's behind Faker, Bengi, Imp, Pawn. BB has made $391,000. Oh no, $276,000 in prize money.
And remember,
as one of the top earners
back in the day, GPL was like the biggest fucking free money in the history of like leagues. It was like that.
True.
GPL was literally like the fucking Harlem Globetrotters versus the Washington Generals, like just wrecking people all day long. And they just get paid sick money at the end. And everyone's like, Clement, I remember I once looked up, all the stats. I was trying to find the most dominating domestic streaks ever. And I immediately had to be like, I'm going to have to disclude some of these fucking GPL ones. Because like, every season someone was just going like 27-1 or like 23 game winning streak. I was like, this doesn't count, mate. This is some bullshit right here. Like,
it really wasn't fair at the start. Like if you look at the player profiles at the start of GPL, a lot of these players were like gold players on the NA server or platinum players on the NA server. And they were getting matched against like top 30, top 10 players on TPA.
So basically, GPL was sort of like the precursor of Dynamic Q. Hey, okay, and we're out. We're all back out the room quietly. No one say anything. We're out. So, okay, only I'm allowed to say that, boys. Not affiliated with writing anywhere. So, here's the question then. If TPA, you're saying like you think they have a chance even against AHQ. Well, if they're going to get there because of the way the playoffs work, the playoffs is the same as in LCK. It's basically like the final boss, like House of Death, like Shogun, fight your way up the dojo style, where the guys from TPA have to start at the bottom and play Machi, and then if they win, they play Flash Wolves. If they win, they play AHQ. So they have to get through Flash Wolves first if they're going to get there. Now, you're making it sound like they're like a better version of Flash Wolves. Do you think they're going to beat Flash Wolves?
In some cases, they are a better version, but in terms of teamfight coordination and just knowing how the players interact with each other, I think Flash Wolves still has an edge in terms of team fighting. Fofo is a relatively new player to the competitive scene, and even though he's actually better in lane than even Maple was, just from the stats and like the CSD stats and the gold stats at 10 minutes, he's not that. I don't think he has that much experience in terms of the team fighting area. So I'd still give Flash Wolves a slight advantage. And the other thing to consider is that I'd still take Karsa over Refrain at the jungler position. So if the 2v2, if like Flash Wolves go for a similar composition if TPA picks a similar composition to Flash Wolves, sure, they'll probably win the top and the bottom, but I don't think they're going to win the 2v2 duel mid, and I don't think they're going to come out ahead that far in team fights. So, honestly, I still have Flash Wolves over TPA when it comes to series score. I still have like Flash Wolves over TPA 3-2, but TPA does have a chance to have an upset here.
That should be a pretty sick mid lane matchup, though, right? I mean, we're talking about people that can play Zed, play LeBlanc. Obviously, like, I mean, you look at almost every game against Flash Wolves, it's like Zed and Gangplank bands, basically, against Maple. So won't that be like a sick 1v1 mid?
Maple's been... His Gangplank has been... I think he's been the best Gangplank I've seen this season from anyone. Like, if you look at his barrels, they're incredibly sick. They're basically touching each other.
Yeah.
Like, and he gets the triple barrel thing off with very high consistency.
I mean, top laner from Longju's pretty sick, but yeah, keep going. So.
Okay, sorry, Monty, but I stick to my points. and the way Flash Wolves plays is that they play around these global ultimates a lot better. They understand how to control tempo. They'll pick like Gangplank and Ezreal.
Okay. And
they have this. They try to like force turrets in the early trade. So a lot of games we've seen Flash Wolves actually trade turrets onto the inhibitor turret.
Right.
And once the other team goes with that trade, they'll just like use a Gangplank ult, use a Ezreal ult, and they'll just come out massively ahead of that and try to gain tempo advantage from there.
Interesting.
So yeah, they have a lot of very intricate timings on their compositions, and if you're facing that for the first time or you're playing against them, I think that it's going to catch a lot of teams off guard.
What do you think of that, Monty? Does anyone else do anything like that at the moment?
Not generally speaking, no.
Sounds like quite a clever idea to use the ults like that, though.
Sure, yeah, it is. But I think a lot of the issue why people don't do that more often these days is that GP is still like floating around the meta in more specific. Yeah. I would say he's a better mid laner than a top laner at the moment because he's a teleport mid laner and he can affect a lot of the lanes in the way champions like Lysandra can, except he can do it without moving because of his ultimate, which is nice. But Ezreal is hard to play in the current meta because of his weak early game, and so much is dependent on snowballing the early game right now. So it can be a challenge, I think, to play Ezreal.
Okay. So, here's the question, Clement. The person we haven't mentioned. Okay, so you mentioned in AHQ they have that special relationship with Aaron from EDG, and so they get to practice with them. And you actually talked about that in the last episode you were on. You mentioned that TPA have this former Najin coach Sim, working with them. What is the coaching stuff like for Flash Wolves? Like, are these famous guys? Are they people we'd know?
Yeah, they have Fluid Winds, who's been in the scene for a very long time. He used to be like the best casting player, and he used to play on like amateur teams against a TPA. Later, he actually became the coach of TPA. Like, he's a really interesting person because he actually started his career as a caster, and he was so knowledgeable in the caster position that he actually got hired by TPA.
Yeah. The story sounds familiar so far. So how did it work out for him?
It didn't work out very well the first time. Like,
shit.
I have to be honest.
Never does.
I don't think that caster to coaching is that smooth of a transition. Like, coaching is really its own area, and for a lot of things, like I think a lot of things that happens in the West is where I've heard people like trying to get casters to get their coaching, and they try to do remote coaching, but personally, for me, I don't really believe in remote coaching being that effective, honestly. I think you need someone in-house who's full-time and just, like, working with the team, like, 24/7. I think if you get a coach, that's kind of the way to go.
I think if you were really, really good at it, you could probably get away with it, but it's obviously going to be hard because, I mean, the key aspect that we've discussed many times on this show is you basically you could do the tactical aspect, but you're going to have no clue about like the personal relationships. Obviously, that's going to be very hard to do.
Also, you have to make sure like there's no way to ensure that your players are paying attention. That's the other problem.
Yeah,
not just like dicking around.
You know what I would have done, Monty? I mean, listen. Everyone knows I'm a different sort of person. I actually like to. follow the Aleister Crowley precept that like normal morality is for normal people, Monty. So what I would have done if I was you and I was the coach of CLG is I would literally have installed keyloggers on everyone's PCs, and I wouldn't tell them. What I would do, Monty, is when that epic showdown happened in that PC bang or whatever it was, or apartment in Korea, when all the players like Link and Doublelift weren't listening, I'd have just said, by the way, Doublelift, I know what you've been doing. He'd be like, whoa, what do you mean? Like, I didn't say anything, Reggie. And no, I actually didn't mean that, Doublelift. What I meant was, every time we're in a Skype call, look at these timestamps. You're all tabbed out. Sometimes you're in Diablo 3. Some Link, I know who that girl is, mate. We got it all on record here. Like, there was a way around it, mate. Unfortunately, your problem is your ethics meant that you thought you could just like trust people and hope that they'd act in their own self-interest. But you should have gone NSA, basically. You should have really like brought out that true Americanness inside you. Joe McCarthy, NSA. That's the way you go on. You control people, and that's how you succeed. So I've given you a little lesson there.
There you go. Thank you so much.
Okay. So anyway, Clement. So
Okay.
they had a remote coaching aspect going on.
Yeah, back to Flash Wolves. So Fluidwin's their analyst, and he's been probably the most recognizable person on the Flash Wolves outside of their players. I think he's really intelligent. He's a pretty funny guy, and what he asks from his player is that he wants them to execute without hesitation. So his personality trait is that if he thinks something should go that way, then he just kind of asks his players to do it, and you can see that in Flash Wolves play. Like, they're the team that execute the cleanest out of the LMS, and you look at their CKPM, which is champion kills per minute. They play they're actually one of the fastest teams this split, and also they have the best KD ratios. Their KD ratio is like 1.85, which is pretty ridiculous, and they have a KD ratio of close to 4 in their games, which they are winning. So if you look at the split in general, they've been the most dominating team, and a lot of it has to do with their
just snowball the fuck out of everyone,
style.
basically.
Yeah, they snowball really, really hard. What you see happening a lot with Flash Wolves is that once they get a pick in the mid lane from like Karsa, Maple, or Sword Art, they instantly transition that into a tower dive on the side lanes, and they can do that because first of all, their players are usually better than the opposing players, and second of all, they typically get the vision down a lot earlier than the enemy team. So for like Maple and Karsa, they've consistently been the players at mid and jungler to place the most wards. Like last split, they placed the most stealth wards, and this split they've kind of continued that trend by placing a lot of wards there. And once they get a pick, they instantly transition through the enemy jungle, do like a tower dive, and when they're rolling, it looks incredibly clean. So that's kind of like the Flash Wolves style. They've always done well in terms of in-game execution. Where they tend to falter is kind of when they screw up the ban picks a little bit. I think this is something that Fluidwinds has been criticized before. Like sometimes they'll miss a couple picks. For instance, in their game opening against AHQ, we just underestimated the Tom Kench pick, and they just got rolled over and stuff like that.
Who do you think is the best team at pick ban in LMS?
When it matters, I still think AHQ is the best.
Okay.
When it matters. AHQ, they can be pretty troll at times when their opponents aren't playing off teams.
So if overall, like your end result there was you still had Flash Wolves winning the series against TPA, assuming they play each other, if that means we have the classic Flash Wolves AHQ final again, is it going to be like seasons past? Is AHQ going to win again?
I think it's a pretty high chance. I have them going 3-1 against Flash Wolves. I think the dynamic is still pretty much the same, is that when both teams are playing low econ top lanes, Ziv just crushes the opposition. Like he just, like I told you, like the last 3 times maybe MMD has played Ziv, he's been benched immediately afterwards. Like that matchup is not good for him. Like historically speaking, that's one of the worst matchups ever in LMS. He's at like minus 13 CSD against Ziv at 10 minutes. So it's pretty difficult for Flash Wolves to get away with that. And the situation will be different if Chowie is in there all 5 games. Like, Chowie has had a pretty bad matchup against Maple mid lane. Like, even so, sometimes even worse than Maple. Sometimes worse than Westor has in terms of, like, getting killed. Westor, he'll fall behind heavily in lane farm, but he generally doesn't get killed. Like, Chowie has been killed a couple times by Maple just solo in lane. So I think that's a point that they might have to consider. The general, if things go out as the previous seasons have gone, then AHQ wins 3-1. But the question for me is, how is AHQ really going to come up? We're not sure. They might even be playing RD at the AD carry position. Like, they're not decided on their lineup at all. So the thing I could see Flash Wolves winning with is that AHQ tries to get a little too creative, tries to go with too many compositions, and overextends on what they're good at, and they just kind of fall flat on that.
So what? How do you think? So let's assume AHQ wins. It's a reasonable pick. If AHQ goes to MSI again, so we have them there this year, and at the moment we're not sure who it will be from the West. Okay, so obviously it could be G2, it could be Origin, it could be CLG, it could be TSM. So how do you think AHQ would do against the Western teams if they were to play at MSI?
I think they do. I think like the Western teams themselves, they vary a lot from each other. The most dangerous team out of the Western teams this time, I think, is definitely TSM, just because their player strength is that good. Like, if you give them enough time to really practice, I think they could be a very serious threat. And Bjergsen has always been held in very, very high regards from the LNES teams.
I mean, the thing about Bjergsen is he always does fine in lane at international competitions, and at least in Korea, the players I've talked to, they say he's a good laner, but there's not a lot of praise beyond his laning capabilities because he doesn't have the same team fighting abilities or map awareness that the top Korean mids have. So they don't really, like, that's kind of the opinion among the mid laners that I've spoken to have played against him in Korea. So I think that's going to be the problem is, like, TSM, certainly their turnaround has been remarkable, right? Like, no one would have expected them to do this. They definitely use their off time very well and have significantly improved, but international competition is an entirely different beast, and while their teamwork has improved, it's still not at the same level as many other international teams that they are going to be facing. And I think, we'll see how the LMS playoffs go, but I mean, I wouldn't say that if TSM goes or if CLG goes, they're a lock to beat AHQ or anything. And if anything, they're probably gonna be underdogs. So,
who do you think is the most dangerous of these teams? Like, these four.
I mean, I would assume G2.
G2.
What do you think, Monty?
I think G2 like plays still a little bit over aggressive, and I think they have a good read on the meta, and I think they're a great team for this meta. It depends obviously on what patch we're going to see MSI played on.
Please 6.8.
I think it's probably 6.7, but it might be 6.8, right? We don't know.
They didn't change Echo at all on 6.7.
Yeah, that's true. But yes, I don't know. Obviously, we've got nearly a month until that tournament happens, so it's a little bit early to tell what exactly patch they're going to be using for that. So I think part of it will depend on how that changes. But G2, I think, is very well situated. But I'm still a little bit worried about G2 because I do think that, like, their bottom lane can really get caught out at times, and while they're great for this meta, I don't think they have the best versatility, and I do think they give up advantages by being too aggressive.
Okay. What do you think in a world where Flash Wolves was to win? How would Flash Wolves fare? Would it be a different story, Clement? Would they have a different teams they'd match up better against?
Let's see. Flash Wolves against TSM. Obviously, we've seen that play out at IEM last year.
Sure.
Yeah, it didn't go that well for them. I think Flash Wolves are actually, how to say, they've remained kind of consistent. Like, I don't think they've actually grown that much from their previous forms. Like, they still have very good strengths in, like, middle and jungle, but at the same time, I'm not that confident in their top laner, and I'm not that confident in their bot laner against international teams. So internationally, I think Flash Wolves would do worse than AHQ because AHQ just has raw player talent and strength to go toe-to-toe against other teams, while Flash Wolves really has to rely more on team play. I think AHQ in general is a safer bet.
I mean, in that case, in a world where CLG make it, maybe that could be a great matchup then, CLG against Flash Wolves.
Yeah, I think Flash Wolves would come out pretty well. I mean, if Darshan was not able to do much against Stake at Worlds last time, I don't think he's going to do much against MMD.
Okay. So before we leave the topic of LMS, I have a question in general, which is, I remember reading one of your power rankings a while ago. Like, one of the things you did in some of those is, like, you did one that was actually not on all esports, where you were talking about, like, the champion picks that people were using. And I remember when Gragas first came back in the meta, basically LMS just went like balls deep on Gragas. It was playing like every single game, pick banned. What have there been any weird picks in LMS, like picks that other regions aren't really using, or in a position where they're not really using it as much? What has it been like in that sense?
First, I have to say that we really haven't seen LMS play that much on the current patch.
Okay.
So I expect to see pretty much the same champions overall. I mean, you tweeted about this as well, is that Riot really decides the meta rather than the teams.
Sure.
And the way that most teams around the world I know about how they go about figuring the meta is that they basically have their players go into solo queue, they see what's strong, and they try to fix compositions based on what's strong in that patch, and that's how it's been going. This season, in general, I think we've seen a lot more assassin play than other regions. For instance, LeBlanc is a very high priority pick for a number of these players. Chawi plays a lot of LeBlanc, Maple plays a lot of LeBlanc, Fofo plays a lot of LeBlanc. Like, the top 3 mid laners in LMS are all assassin focused players. So
I mean, there's a lot of LeBlanc in Korea too. So.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure about LCS. I don't.
Not so much.
Yeah.
I mean, LCS, it's more like LCS is more like it's just like the ones who in Europe who are LeBlanc players anyway still play it, but not as much in LCS.
I think the understanding of games, but
the understanding of LeBlanc is a little different in the West than it is in LMS. I feel like in the West, like where I've heard the casters talk about LeBlanc, it's generally been that, oh, she's this snowbally type of assassin player where she has to get kills or she's not really that relevant late game. But in Taiwan, like, she's viewed as this very safe pick. If the score is 0-0 past like 20 minutes, then LeBlanc actually becomes a very, very dangerous threat. Just because
that's true, but that's the definition of going even or ahead, though, right? And I agree if she farms up normally. The problem that you encounter with LeBlanc and why not every team is going to play LeBlanc in Korea, or is more of a situational pick, or is based on teams that snowball the game early, is because with the current strength of Mob now Mortius, like, basically, if you have Kindred or Graves in the jungle, they're going to be buying a Maw. Your AD carry can buy a Maw. If you have a Varus in the mid lane, he can buy a Maw. Like, so at a certain point, LeBlanc literally just runs out of targets in the late game, and she can't actually kill anybody. So that's been the big problem. And I've seen that many, many times in Korea, where LeBlanc just does nothing in the late game because of itemization.
Yeah,
this doesn't happen in LMS.
Not really. Not really. I think Maple and Fofo LeBlanc are at the point where they still manage to get a lot of damage and are serious threats on the map. Like, even against Maw and Abyssals, like, I think the itemization is pretty much the same across regions. Like, your AD carries are going to go for the Maw, and like your mid laners are going to go for the Abyss. But they've really been proficient enough on these champions where they can kind of counteract that just with the efficiency they have, the mastery they have over the champion.
Was there much Kindred usage in LMS?
Oh, sure. Like, there's pretty much only 4 junglers played right now: Graves, Kindred, Nidalee, Gragas. That's pretty much it.
So no
Elise.
Oh, okay. Right,
and Elise as well. Yeah, I forgot to mention that one. The meta across regions is incredibly similar, to be honest. Sure. The champion picks are... that's the thing I feel bad about, like, Immortals for. It's like, in a perfect world, picking compositions should be about what you're good at and your synergy between your compositions and how do you counteract the tools that the other team has picked. But, we're not even living in that world, so Immortals got shit on.
Okay. And when you said they haven't played much on this new patch, you expect the same thing? So you're expecting like Rise, like what, Trundle support, this sort of stuff?
Yes. I'm expecting lots of Echo, maybe even first pick Echo.
Okay.
That champion is just broken beyond imagination.
And is this like the tank Echo that everyone's using right now? You think that's going to be the way it's going to use?
Yeah, definitely. Like the teams are already practicing on. We see it a lot in like the player streams and whatnot. So it's not going to be like TSM versus IMT for sure. There's definitely going to be Echo ban picks.
Okay. What do you think, Monte, of Echo? Because obviously that was one of the ways that actually Darshan was able to carry that series. What do you think of the Echo usage at the moment?
I think it's incredibly broken, and you should not allow it through pick and ban. That's what I think. It should be first picked either on blue or red side, or should just be entirely banned out. At least we saw some counterplay to it the other day when Longzhu was playing up against Jin Air, and they showed that like a full damage Fiora can actually sort of deal with it okay. That was a bit interesting. It's the first time that I've ever seen that particular pick, especially as Fiora has fallen off.
Don't you have to kind of like feed the Fiora early though?
Yeah, I think you might. Like, definitely Expression did get fed in that game.
Like, it might be resource heavy in that sense,
Yeah, it might be resource heavy. Also, might depend on standard lanes. So, I'm not sure exactly how reliable that is, but it did work. So.
Okay.
In solo queue, I think someday picks Aurelia into Echo top lane, and what he tries to do is
going to be buffed too, so.
Yeah, so what he tries to do is he just tries to all in the Echo at level 3 and try to get a kill that way. Like he doesn't go for Grasp of the Undying. He just straight up goes for Thunderlord's Decree, and he tries to kill you at level 3. And if it doesn't do that, it's just like whatever, lost lane.
What do you think about trying to use Riven again, Monty? Is that an option?
I don't know, actually. I have no idea.
Because I'm trying to think what else could come into the meta that might help if people don't just ban it out completely.
I don't know. I think actually the Korean playoffs are going to tell us a lot, because teams are going to be hardcore preparing for Echo, and somebody's going to figure out something. I promise you. So perhaps Riven will be it, but I'm not sure.
Okay. So Clement,
you look at Champion GG right now. Like there are no negative matchups for Echo. 0. It's insane.
Yeah, but the pro players. I mean, we already saw Longzhu at least have this full damage Fiora pick where it was like Tiamat into Black Cleaver, and that actually worked out really, really well. But again, I'm not sure how reliable that is, and I'm sure somebody else is going to figure out something to pick into the Echo, whether it's the Aurelia, like you're saying, or something else.
Yeah. So okay, before we leave the LMS section, Clement, give us like a hype up the playoffs. Why should someone want to watch the LMS playoffs?
Because I think the LMS might represent like the top 3 regions in the world at this point.
Oh shit!
I definitely think.
Oh damn, son, damn. Okay, wait a minute. Let me just break it down, Clement. So we've got Korea. What's number 2? Korea. Then what's number 2?
I haven't been watching that much of LPL. Right. I'll say that the games I've watched, I was like, I'm not terribly.
Oh, wait a second, Monty. He still has LPL number 2. Oh, damn, son.
No, I didn't.
Trash talk
is
fire. Okay, okay. What was number 2 then?
I just haven't seen that much of LPL, but from the impression I've gotten, I think the LPL teams are pretty unstable at this point.
All right. Okay.
To be honest.
So what's the top?
You would be accurate in saying that.
Like they can play good some games, and they just like they it's obvious to me that they still have communication problems with their Korean players. Like it's very clear that it's hindering their team play in some ways. And watching the EU and NA playoffs, I just don't think the competition really was that furious. Especially the EU playoffs, I think a lot of teams just completely forgo. Like they didn't pay much attention to lane control. They went very, very aggressive at times that I don't think even the LMS teams would do that. Like a lot of like Flash Wolves and TPA, they wouldn't go into fights doing stuff like that. Watching LMS this season, like all the games, I do feel that LMS's macro game has improved significantly over the course of the year, just with how much they're screwing with the Korean teams, how much they're actually in contact with the some of the better Chinese teams screwing. And the macro game, I think, honestly, is better than the LCS regions.
Okay, bold words. But I mean, I don't think it's. By the way, I don't think that's unreasonable. It's bold because most people don't know about LMS. I don't think that's even that controversial. Like, especially, I mean, obviously we can't address that too much on this show because again, we didn't break it down. But after seeing what a shit show the fucking LCS playoffs have been, where like both the 6 seeds beat the 3 seeds, and then people are just like, like the big favorites losing. Like the 2 favorites in both regions have lost already. Like, you look at AHQ, they've just been like a consistently good team. Then you look at Flash Wolves, they're a stable team. Like, you know how they're going to win games. These teams make sense to me. So I think they'll, at the very least, match up well against the West, if not be better. Like, I'll say it outright.
Well, I think for me, it's still the question of how are they going to adapt to patch 6.6? Because we talk about these upsets, but a lot of them have been. So the NA and EU teams had 2 weeks to adapt to the current way to play League of Legends. And it seems like they finally managed to like pull up a YouTube video of some Korean teams playing and look at the Rocks Tigers and be like, wow, we could probably do this. But it took that 2-week break for these teams to really sit down, with the exception of G2, who was already playing like that, by the way. But when we talk about teams like TSM or like Fnatic, they adapted much more to a Korean style of play and to the priority of picks in Korea. But I think it took them the 2 weeks of scrimming and not having a match that week to really just like go into these new champions, go into these new pick priorities, and it's yielded some really good results for them. Meanwhile, you have Immortals, and I don't know what the fuck they were doing for 3 weeks, by the way, because that performance and their draft was incredibly confusing and 100% pathetic and off meta. I just have no words for it. Why do you think Lucian top is a good idea? Why?
Because who needs?
Do you know? It's like, do you even know why no one is playing Graves top anymore? It's because tanks are super strong, and you just put him in the jungle and beat the shit out of him, and you dive turrets with him because he can provide the damage on other parts of the map. And your tank and your mid laner TP in and CC people, and you feed the jungler. It's like, come on. Everybody else knows this. TSM figured it out in 1 week less to prepare. You watched TSM do it the previous week. What the fuck? Immortals. What the fuck?
Okay, we'll pick up that segment called "What the Fuck Immortals," and there will be a part 2 to that soliloquy in a future episode. So, Clement, you watch LCK, right?
A bit when I have time. Like, this season for me, I've moved more to a producer role. So I cast and I produce, and I have like a 60-hour work week. So
he's casting, he's producing. Listen, outside of that. The obvious joke here, Clement. So you get a lot of girls, but do you actually watching League of Legends though, mate? That's the question, right? So you're leading into saying you don't watch much, right? You just watch the big games or something.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I think that's pretty bad to say, but haven't been following LCK that much.
Okay. Can you give us some basic impressions then, and then you can go. Me and Monty will do the LCK segment. Give us some impressions of what you think of LCK.
I've seen a lot of Ashe. I kind of want to ask on that. Like, is that just something like the Rocks Tigers has been really proficient at, and the other teams pick that up?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah. Okay, there are certain teams that can actually play Ashe, and one of them is the Rocks Tigers. And there are certain teams that continue to pick Ashe, but are terrible, like Jin Air. So, yes. Okay, so don't or Longzhu. So a lot of people lose on Ashe in Korea, but the Rocks Tigers are very good because they set up pick compositions, and Prey and Gorilla are good at laning safely with it, and then once they hit 6, they just start diving turrets with Ashe Arrow, right? And they set up picks. So really it's like Rocks that's good at Ashe and nobody else. So they're trying to mimic what Rocks is doing, but only Rocks can do that effectively. So don't read too much into the Ashe.
All right. Because I saw
Pilot is building Ginsu's Hurricane first 2 items Ashe. Like literally builds. No, it doesn't work. It's terrible.
Okay.
So he's basically the MVP of the other team in most of those games. He does that.
Jin Air has been doing that, and they've done it more than once now, and they haven't won with it. So, just saying, like, don't read too much into the Ashe. It has been mostly unsuccessful unless your name is Prey.
All right. The other thing is, like, how would you, like, distribute the teams in terms of tiers?
I think that
So he's
just given
secretly
the,
getting you to do a power ranking right now. This is how LoL Esports works, Monty. If you won't cooperate one way,
Damn you.
they will find another way. So, okay. So what would your tiers be then, Monty?
Interested on your opinion about that.
probably Rox is still going to be in the top tier, although it's been really close. And then SKT, KT, and it's like I said, it's hard to say because basically all the top teams have been beating each other. In the second round robin, for example, Rox beat SKT, and then KT beat.
Basically, we had Clement there, like describing why you should watch LMS. Like he was basically talking about it's like one of the top regions in his opinion. Like it's going to be key for the international stage, right?
Yep. I think there's a pretty good chance for like a LMS even in the finals. Just to see them appear there. No, at MSI. Worlds is a little too far off. I'm not going to look that far in my crystal ball.
All right. So they could be in the final of LMS because obviously you think they could beat like LPL and Western regions. Obviously, it's up for debate.
Yeah, MSI. Of course, they're going to be in the finals for LMS.
Oh yeah, I meant MSI. Yeah, sure.
So when we talk about, just out of curiosity, and obviously you can't disclose too much, but we talked about this a little bit earlier. But how much do AHQ practice against the Korean and the Chinese teams? Are these like their primary scrim partners these days, or what's been the interaction like? Do they get a lot of time with these teams from other regions?
Yes, primarily Chinese teams, from what I've understood, and some Korean teams. But I don't think they get that high up the totem pole in Korean teams. Like probably not SKT or Rox Tigers at this point, but some lower tier Korean teams definitely.
I do know from my own discussions that AHQ does scrim a lot with the challenger Korean teams.
Yes, they do. They do that
I've heard
a lot.
that quite frequently.
And they're incredibly troll in scrims. Like AHQ has always been the team that's known. Like before Worlds, they scrimmed 100 games and they only won like 6 of them.
For what reason?
Well, I don't think that's a very good use of time.
In scrims, like they've been known to be atrocious in scrims, but somehow pull it out in big tournaments. So that's why I'm always kind of worried about AHQ. Like they've been winning so long domestically that they're just kind of like floating at this point. They're not connected to reality anymore. That something has to snap for them to really come back.
Okay. Right. So thanks for appearing on the episode as usual. We will bid goodbye to you for now, and everyone who likes the things Clement was talking about can watch the LMS playoffs. Like I say, it's like a King of the Hill type one where you start 3rd versus 4th, then the winner of that plays the 2nd place team, which is Flash Wolves, and the winner of that plays AHQ, who is waiting in the final. What is the date of the final?
Yeah, just let me plug that in. It's the 15th to the 17th. The 17th will be the final, and before the playoffs go out, I'm going to have an article on the score. I'm going to take you guys more into detail about the teams, and we're going to have the MVP and the Rookie of the Split and the Best Coach awards at the same time on the score as well. So look forward to that.
Okay,
Sweet.
Thanks. Okay, we're back to do the LCK portion of the show. We've let Clement leave us now. We've really started to learn now that when people don't follow a region enough, they can get into trouble if you let them comment on things. That's the problem. You're sort of asking them to walk into areas they don't know where the traps are. They don't know what the popular opinions are, the unpopular ones. So the first thing I have to ask you, Monty, about LCK goes like this. What has happened to the Afreeca Freecs? Before, when Afreeca Freecs won a game, we would always frame it like this, like, fuck, how bad is that team? They're even losing to the Afreeca Freecs. No, they're legit now. They're actually winning games at like a pretty good clip now, right?
Yeah, and I think what happened to Afreeca is like it's a combination of getting better, and also, of course, I mean, we've been talking about this a lot this show, but the transitions in the metagame, right? So when we take a look at what Afreeca has done, first off, they started out obviously being pretty damn bad. They began the season 1-6. And then they went on a streak which had them ending 10-8. So they went 9-2 over that stretch. In the second round robin of play, they did quite well. They beat absolutely everybody in the league except for SK Telecom and the Rox Tigers. So they're looking like a pretty legitimate threat for the actual playoffs, which is really exciting, actually, when you take a step back and actually think about how well they've done and how surprising, I suppose, their turnaround has been. Yeah, I mean, what else are you going to say? Like, they've looked surprisingly good. They even took a game off of SK Telecom. So what changed about them? I think that as we talk about a lot of these metagame shifts, one thing that really helped them was the transition into tank top laners and carry junglers, because we've seen how wonderful a player like Lyra can be on some of these more tank-based champions, or I mean, carry-based champions. Like when we take a look at Graves, which he's been absolutely excellent on, and Ixu also. I don't think he's been pretty good by all statistical metrics. He's sort of in the middle of the pack for Korean top laners, but he's been able to play a lot of tanks. And when you can have Songyun, their AD carry, and Lyra sort of carry the game, that's going to be really effective when you don't have to worry about having a carry top laner, which I think held them back in the early stages of the season when carry top laners were more meta. So the other factor is, if we actually look at their pick and ban phase, because of the pressure that Mickey draws in the draft phase, because people will just ban out Zed and TF because he's so good at these champions, what it does is it leaves a lot of the big power picks up for the rest of the team. So Ixu plays like Poppy a whole lot, and he gets Poppy a whole lot, and Songyun gets Callista all the time as a result of this. So because of what we see from Mickey's necessary bans, it's opened up so many other power picks for the Afreeca Freecs, and it's given them, I think, a greater degree of flexibility in that arena that we don't really see from other teams, where perhaps banning a TF and a Zed, these pocket bans, is not quite so important. So they've really, really benefited, I think, from that, and that's been kind of core to their draft. The other thing that they did is that they have some unusual flex picks, or they did at least previously. Now other Korean teams are starting to play more of the Gragas top, but when they could, on red side, take the Gragas pick very early on in any given draft, they were successful with it because they could take it in the like as a first round draft pick on red side and then flex it, and that's a freedom in the draft that no one else really had. So they were coming up big in that regard too. So there's been like I think a lot of factors, and also of course they're just improvement when it comes to closing out games, because we look at the Afreeca Freecs and they were always a strong early game team. They were able to generate like a lot of gold leads in that early game, but they were not really ever able to close games. I mean, right now the Afreeca Freecs are number 2 in the league at average gold lead or average gold differential at 15 minutes behind the Rocks Tigers. But their problem was closing the damn game once they got that advantage, and that does not seem to be as much of a problem anymore. So that's another factor that we have to take into consideration, is that their improvement in their shot calling and their synergy. So I think it's a combination of the meta shift is favorable. They've been very good at the draft phase as a result of teams being forced to ban picks that Mickey will just sort of win the game on, leaving the other players with very good picks that other teams would not get quite as frequently, and an improvement in shot calling in the late game. So these three factors, I think, have really led to the Afreeca Freecs' success.
Did you see where LoL Esports did that tweet that was just like one of those like non sequitur ones where it was like, who is the best top player in LCK? And it was like, it's who you'd expect.
In the world.
Oh yeah, that's it. It was like, wasn't it like?
It was Smeb,
Huni, yeah,
Ixu, or other.
And then you were like, whoa. First two, yeah, okay, I'm with you. Like, whoa, where did this word name come from?
No, I wasn't even with him. Huni is not the best top laner in the world. Not by a lot.
But the Ixu one was pretty much like, whoa, listen, I know Duke hasn't been doing that sick, but really, Ixu, like, what's going on here, guys? It's like they just went for some, like, super deep hipster pick. Like, I think Ixu could be like, okay, LoL Esports, just dial it back a bit,
Here's why that happened. And so that was a preparation for PTL.
Okay.
Which happened, like, the next day. But at the same time, I mean, first off, I didn't get it in any sense or stretch of the imagination why that would be the case. But what happened was the next day on PTL, they did a segment that was about top laners, and what they were doing was they were trying to track the Afreeca Freecs' success and their rise. Okay. And I think that they just like looked at the MVP standings, and Ixu had like a lot of he has the most MVP points on the team. Right. But realistically, first off, in my opinion, he should not have that many MVP points.
Sure.
Considering, as I said, like Lyra, for me, Lyra and Songyun have been kind of, and even Snowflake, I mean, all of them have been good. It's not like Ixu's been bad, but Ixu has just been like playing Poppy and Gragas every game, and he gets them because of all of the bans that Mickey draws. So he's been on a lot of very powerful champions without much, I would say, challenge to them. So that's been a bit odd. And he, like I said, he's been a beneficiary of the draft phase, and they've had this team identity, and they've realized this, and it's been good. I think the Afreeca Freecs deserve the success that they've gotten, but Ixu, while he's been pretty good, has not been outstanding, and he is by no means an there's no way that he is the best top laner in the world, or even in that conversation.
Not necessary to even include.
I mean, we can name 4 better top laners in Korea than him immediately. I mean, we have Smeb, got Someday, got Trace,
Duke even.
Duke, yeah, of course. And then you get to the point where you're actually like, well, Cuve's pretty good too. At that point from Samsung. So Untara has had an interesting season. Was stronger sort of in the middle, so maybe you put Ixu as better than him now, but he's not really in the conversation, in my opinion, for best top laner of the world. He didn't show a lot of acumen on carry picks. He doesn't have the biggest amount of versatility as a top laner. So, but that was, I think, I'm guessing here, honestly, but I think that was the reason behind them saying that, or them putting out that poll, was that they were prepping people for the PTL segment. But as a non sequitur, when it just kind of came up, I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah. So, okay, yeah. That's just the reason I brought it up, because some people might think, well, I think I saw him in a poll. Like, no, that does make sense. So, okay, on the topic of Lyra, now this is an example of someone where I never expected this guy to be good, because unless I'm mistaken, wasn't this the guy who was the infamous jungler of poor old Macnoon when he went over to Katie Arrows and they just died in the qualifier? I think he was on that team.
Yes, he was. And he was also, if you remember, he was on CJ Frost.
Just didn't get to play a lot. Because obviously they had Swift at that time, right?
Well, no, this was pre-Swift,
okay.
Actually. So he was, and also when Macnoon, I think, was on CJ Frost, he was the jungler for Macnoon there. Okay. He didn't actually get much of a chance, and he then left that team, and he went to China to play on OMG's B team for a while, and then he came back to Korea and came on to the Afreeca Freecs. But Lyra is really sound mechanically, and his Graves is absolutely amazing. As many of you, I'm sure, have seen in some of these team fights that he's had, he's been really on point. So his skill on the meta junglers like Graves and Nidalee and Kindred is amazing, and that's a huge part, I think, of their success. If we were to go back to a tank jungle meta, Freecs probably wouldn't be as good as they are right now.
Yeah, he obviously is like a full-on carry jungler as well.
Yeah, big time.
So, okay, this meta shift then, obviously, as we've lined it up here, I mean, if Ixu's not some beast top lane, it's ideal that they can have tanks. We've got the carry jungler coming out the jungle. This is all great. In fact, in many ways, like, you can see how the meta shift actually isn't going to hurt G2 in Europe, because they were already doing that shit. They already had Kickers on tanks. Yes. They already had Trick wanting to carry cell.
Well, that's when I came into my G2 prediction. That's why I was like, this team is already... They were doing this at the same time the Rocks Tigers doing it. They realized that this was good before a lot of the other teams, and I really credit G2 quite a bit for having that foresight. Okay. You know what I mean?
So my question is about Mickey then, because he's the guy where we actually did notice this guy. Like, when it used to be Anarchy, this is the person that you'd notice, because every now and then he'd have that one game where he went off. I always think of Mickey, like, in my mind, where I categorize him. He reminds me a bit of Frozen, because the thing is, they're the players where they were both on bad teams, but they were like the okay player who'd have a good game, and you'd be like, yeah, maybe he has some potential, but his team's so dog shit, you think, well, he'll never do anything. Well, both of them now are on better teams, have shown some better... Where does Mickey actually stack up in the mid laners? Is he like the star for you of the team?
No, he's not. And I think that is relatively unarguable at this point in time. Certainly what's great about Mickey is that what is Mickey good at? He's good at Twisted Fate and Zed, and to a lesser degree LeBlanc, although he can throw games on LeBlanc now, and that's kind of what he's shown. When Mickey was at his prime, he was that assassin player or that roaming player who could make a big effect on the rest of the map. And he's still really good at split pushing with TF and Zed. But his teleport usage is pretty not great. That's been like a big problem. I think that Mickey has shown this season, barring like TF ultimate. Like for some reason he can do well on TF ults, but he can't actually do well on regular teleport usage. It's one of the weirder things I've actually seen. I don't really understand it. But Mickey, when he plays Lulu, like he doesn't really play Lulu in team fighting very well. Sometimes he's slow to group up with the rest of his team. So he's not really a great team player. He's more of an individual split pushing or like 1v1 outplay style guy. And that shows too. I mean, we've seen amazing laning phases on LeBlanc where he'll pick up solo kills and then he will be in the wrong place and get picked off and then throw the game, right? So he's kind of a mixed bag. And I feel like where Mickey used to be their biggest strength, he's now actually one of their bigger weaknesses, which is odd. It's like an odd situation to be in, right?
But yeah, so the point I'm basically making about the lineup is not only has this team become good, but it's not like they've done it with any like quality names. Like there's no star names here. Like even that guy was like good on a bad team rep. Lyra, like I said, had no rep basically.
Yeah.
Ixu was a non-factor. Basically, they've actually organically become a good team.
Yeah, and that's impressive. They part of it. So they got the head coach that was formerly CJ's head coach on the staff for the Afreeca Freecs, and so he's highly experienced. Whatever you think about CJ's ability to play League of Legends in the past, or their, of course, questionable decision making when it comes to roster management, but perhaps he's been one of the major factors for them. But yeah, the Freaks are really coming along. Also, you have to remember, too, that when they were Rebels Anarchy, they had like literally no support, and then they had Hachani as their coach, and they were really just kind of this like super scrappy underdog team that didn't have any sponsorship or stability, and that changed this year. That changed when Afreeca picked them up. And the whole story, too, is they were like kicked out of Kespa. I don't know if you know this, Thorin. So they're not actually a Kespa team, because what happened was, so Songyun and Snowflower in particular are very popular streamers on Afreeca, which is a streaming platform here in Korea. And they didn't want to stream on Azubu because they wanted to stay on Afreeca. So they sort of got kicked out of Kespa because the Kespa deal with Azubu forces all Kespa teams to stream on Azubu, right? So what ended up happening was that Afreeca sponsors them directly, but they're not actually a Kespa team.
So are they the only one in the league at the moment that isn't in Kespa? I mean, maybe one of the other bottom ones is.
No, I'm not sure if the Rocks Tigers are.
Okay. Actually. Right. So the question, though, is, as we wrap up the season, where will... what is the actual future for Afreeca? Like, they're a nice run now. They got some nice upset wins. What do you think can actually happen for them?
I think they can. Look, we know they're a threat. That's the thing is they've already beaten SK Telecom this season. They beat in the first round robin, but that was a week before the start of the second round robin where they won the first game against SKT again, and then it was a pretty tight series that SKT won 2-1. They beat KT. They lost to Rocks, but at this point you have to consider them a major threat for the playoffs. And with Jin Air just in this slow slide at the end of the season where they're coming into the playoffs 0-4 in their last four and looking super
obviously
shaky.
Did lose to Freaks themselves.
Yes, recently too.
So you think Afreeca Freecs can beat Jin?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think they're absolutely the favorites going in. You look at Jin Air, like I said, they've lost 4 of their last 4. And then you take a look at a team like Afreeca, who's gone 7-2 with only losses, a narrow loss to SKT and a loss to the Rocks Tigers in the second round robin. And you have to consider these guys as pretty serious contenders. They've got a long road to hoe, right? They have to go through a best of 3 and then 2 best of 5s. They have to win all of that to even make it to the finals. So that's probably not going to happen, but it could. It could happen.
So you mentioned this when we were talking this segment with Clement about the Ashe picks. So this is one of the key areas that has been a weakness for Jin Air. Is what's weird about Jin Air is in the past, Pilot used to look pretty decent, and then they sometimes had Captain Jack come in. This season, yeah, obviously Trace is like the best player on their team, but Kuzon's been pretty good. And then it's actually like AD Carry is the one letting them down. Like, I wasn't joking. Some of those Ashe games that Pilot has, he is like the MVP for the other team.
Yeah, no, it's true, and I think, but they know when he plays. That's got to be on the coaching staff to a certain degree, right? Because they know when he's going to be playing these champions, right? And they pick it, even though they know he's going to be doing this like Ginsu's Rageblade build or whatever garbage that he's going to try and pull out, right? So it's not like they're not in the know about this particular situation. So at a certain point, it has to sort of fall on the coaching staff to take some sort of responsibility.
If you had to theory craft, what do you think he thinks he's trying to do when he does that?
Well,
what's he hoping for?
I think it does. It makes for a very bad laning phase, but it theoretically does a lot of damage in team fights. But I think at a professional level, with a very low mobility carry like Ashe, it's not really reasonable to expect that you're going to be able to carry games like that.
Do you think it's just solo queue shit then?
Or maybe it does well in scrims, but with the current like tank meta and the crowd control that we're seeing from a lot of these teams, these like top teams and the ability to team fight, sure, Ashe can do a lot of damage there, but the difference between that build with Kog'Maw and that build with Ashe is that Kog'Maw's W gives you such an extreme amount of range that it makes up for the lower mobility because you're not in as much threat. Whereas Ashe, you have to get pretty close to be able to, or closer, let's just say, to be able to pull that off. And I think in Pilot and team fights, when he gets that close to maximize his damage, sure, he does a lot of damage, but he also dies. So I just don't think it's very good. And also is just terrible in the laning phase, just real bad.
So this Jin Air drop-off is really disappointing when you consider how well they've done for most of the season. They were looking really, really solid. They were getting like all these nice wins all over the place. Has the meta change affected them?
I think it has. And I think that when Prey came out, you remember what he was playing at the beginning of the season where they were winning a lot of games. When they beat SKT early on, they were the ones who started that top lane Graves pick. They were playing triple AD carry compositions really well. Yeah. And they were playing disengage comps, right? And I think that's the key to understanding Jin Air is that they were playing top Graves and top Quinn, and they were split pushing or they were playing kiting compositions. And now, in a meta where hard engage and TP flanks and tank tops are really important, Trace could carry the team with a carry jungler or a carry top laner, but he just can't carry the team on some of these tanks. And not only that, but their communication coordination looks really off. Like when they try and TP flank in a team fight, they're really uncoordinated. They don't do it right, and their timing is off. So whenever they try and engage fights, like Jin Air is great when they don't have to engage. When they're kiting, when they're disengaging, that's when they're at their strongest. When they have to engage, they usually mess it up, and that's been a big issue with their team fighting.
So when they played against Rox Tigers recently, like Trace tried to do the Echo, and basically Smeb just like beat the fuck out of them with Rise, right? What do you think of this matchup? You can't give Smeb Rise, surely.
Well, I think it is unwise to give Smeb Rise. You are correct.
Should that be like one of the like permabans now against certain teams? You think Rise is that good?
Well, it's the thing too is Kuro can also play Rise, so you're running into dangerous flex pick territory, I believe, when you start getting into those kind of conversations. So yeah, I do think that it is risky, definitely risky to run those styles of compositions against the Tigers or to let them have these particular picks.
What do you think about all these Karma mid picks that we've had? Like, had like a few over the last few weeks in different regions.
I think it's good. I think it's, as Faker has shown, it can be both strong and weak. And by that, I mean that Faker plays too aggressively with it and can die in lane. But just purely as a theoretical pick, especially with the way Faker builds it with the item Ardent Sensor, where if you're playing 2 AD carries, like one in the bot lane and then one in the jungle, Ardent Sensor, when you just hit everybody with a shield, it gives your AD carries like a 15% attack speed bonus. So it's really good at buffing your team. You get a lot of movement speed. It's basically like a different version of Lulu, but it's a version of Lulu that is less safe in the laning phase.
That's one of the things about Faker as well. That I realize when you're listing off qualities, the guy is so good, you have to go through quite a lot before you get to this, but he is a fantastic laner, but he's also one of the best players I've ever seen, that even if he loses lane or gets killed in lane, will still find some way to have impact in a team fight, you know.
I mean, no question, right?
Like you never can just put him out the game entirely. I think that's the reason why people don't just like 24/7 dive him, because like it might not even be the best way to win the game. You may be better off trying to minimize someone else in the team, you know.
Sure.
So
I think it's always a major consideration when Faker's in the game.
Do Jin have chances though against Afreeca Freecs? Like, is there enough time to figure something out, or do you think like we're saying here, the meta shift
Jinner's last game was 2 days ago, right? And they have 2 days from now, as of recording this episode, to fix their problems. I don't think that's realistic. Afreeca is much better situated. It's not like the LCS playoffs where teams have weeks to figure their shit out. They just don't have that time right now.
Okay. So SK Telecom is the next up in the playoff bracket, who will play the winner of the Jin versus Afreeca Freecs game. And here's the thing, Monty. If I took this out of time and I just told you, Monty, all I'm going to tell you is in the future, actually, Faker is still playing on SK Telecom, and you know what? KT wins. They clean sweep him. You'll be like, yes! And I'll be like, plot twist, SK Telecom aren't that good anymore. Like, shit! Because like you want them to do it when they're really good. What do you think? What do you think of SKT?
SKT is still a really good team. I mean, we're going to talk about SKT. They're still going to be a top. They're still going to be a top 4 or 5 team in the world, right? If not top 3.
Okay.
I mean, who else are you going to put up there?
Well, I mean, there's not a lot of competition, but I mean, they clearly have their flaws as well, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that while Blank has been doing well for a rookie jungler, he's still a rookie jungler. And in their games against KT, he kind of got styled on by Score. Score, I think, was the better jungler in that particular series. But those games were really close, and that could have easily been a 2-0 for SKT. Yes, it was a 2-0 for KT, but those were some of the closest games that we've had this season. And I hope we get an SKT-KT playoff match, because that would be really exciting.
And obviously, yeah, there's a potential chance for that, since if SKT win that match, they'll play KT in the next round. If SKT are a fantastic team, like you say, one of the best in the world, do they actually have a chance to win LCK still? Is this possible?
I think they do. But again, they're just not the best equipped for this particular meta. Like, Peanut is the ultimate jungler in this meta. It's just ridiculous, like, how good he can be.
Well, obviously, the funny thing is, if you remember about Peanut, we were worried what would happen if they went like the other way, and it was like the pure Gragas Cinderhawk type shit, and obviously it's the opposite. That Riot's like, no, Peanut, time for you to win, mate.
Yeah, it's been great for him, quite clearly, and he has suffered on some of those other champions like Gragas, but the Rocks Tigers, my concern about them is that sometimes they pick like 4 damage dealers and then a tank support for Gorilla, and that can end up in them getting picked off and perhaps losing games. I mean, they nearly lost to Kongdu that way, and that was pretty sad, honestly. So it's not like they're 100% free of any possible issues, if you know what I mean.
Okay. So if the meta change means now we're going to see more tank top, I mean, obviously you can still sort of play Echo, which isn't like just a pure tank. It's still, there's something to be done there. How does this affect Duke on SK Telecom? Because obviously this guy...
Duke's been doing well.
This guy's a fantastic split pusher. Like, how's it going to affect him going forward, though?
I think it's actually fine for Duke. I think Duke has shown that especially that KT series where we got to see both Duke and Sunday have amazing Echo games. It was really satisfying to watch. I think that he's going to be just fine overall.
Does it take anything away from SK Telecom then? Like, I mean, they don't have Bengi now. They don't have Myron anymore. Like, how do you think the team actually like manages in terms of like shot calling or overall team approach in that sense?
It's been improving. Duke still has the odd game here and there where he isn't, I think, playing particularly well or following some of his team's calls. But on the whole, I think it's hard to argue with how they've been doing recently. Duke has looked pretty strong.
And you mentioned when I asked about the Karma pick, like obviously this was one of the rare games where we saw Faker kind of like make some big missteps at times.
Well, yeah, he's been playing way too aggressively in the laning phase recently and dying a lot in lane, which is uncharacteristic, but I think teams have figured out that Faker does like to play this way, and perhaps he isn't getting the necessary vision support from Blank in these games that he's used to getting from Bengi, so we may see some hiccups there too.
Yeah, because he doesn't have a ward bot. He has a guy who actually is playing like carry junglers and shit, so it's like, whoa, what are you, whoa, what are you doing going in that lane, mate? Come and put a ward over here. So
I do think it's a little bit more than that, because really Blank has been more farming and counter jungling, and then carrying these games in some of the team fights. But obviously he's not so much of a 1v1 artist as Peanut or Score are.
So, okay, as I mentioned, KT beat SK Telecom. At the end of the day, KT has managed to get into that second spot, Monty. It was looking touch and go for a while with Jin. How do you feel overall the season's gone for KT now? Have they resolved the issues?
I don't know about that. The weird thing about KT is that they still have this mid laner in Fly who is he has the lowest percent damage of any mid laner, and he also has the lowest percentage of gold of any mid laner. So he plays all these utility mids, and sometimes this works, as we've seen. Sometimes he's got some weird pocket picks like the Malzahar that actually ended up working when they played against the Rocks Tigers when they beat Rocks, and that looked pretty okay at the time. I still think that it can be a little bit hard to tell, because they've had some, like I said, they've had a lot of success, and their Zillion Poppy compositions that they run are normally quite clean, and I like that about them. But at the same time, their draft has oscillated between like quite good and quite bad. When they lost to Jin Air, they were playing like 4 tanks and Draven, and that was just ridiculous and didn't work out very well for them. But that was several weeks ago now, and they've been pretty consistent in their coming into the playoffs. So we'll hope that that doesn't actually happen again and we get some good series. KT really does win and lose as a team, though. They don't really have, besides Someday, a lot of, or N Score, players that we would consider stars or having a giant effect on the game at hand, right?
I mean, even then, Score is more like the play the map type player. It's not like he's just going to straight body the whole game, you know.
No, he can. He doesn't do it as often as, say, Peanut does, but it's not 100% out of the question, right?
But, I mean, the thing is, when I look at their team, I mean, the obvious deficiency to me is the bot lane. Like, I think our bot lane can be crap at times.
That's true.
And then Arrow has all these picks that he like. He's the guy where he should not be allowed to pick what he picks in the game. Like, he picks some retarded shit.
Yes, but there's also the caveat that they have been doing better these days, as they've been doing better when it comes to picking, Sivir, or putting a high priority on champions that he doesn't need to excel on to win games, right? Sivir is so powerful right now, or Lucian, which has a safer laning phase. I mean, he's not a bad AD carry. He's just not a top-tier AD carry either. So as long as you can find a role for him that works with the team, and again, the way KT works is based on their teamwork and their coordination and their decisiveness, not because they have an overwhelming number of star players. If we look at SKT or the Rocks Tigers, obviously these guys have way more star players than KT has. They do it better with the teamwork and with their overall planning, and I think they're kind of wacky compositions that are actually quite effective that only they play.
Do you think that, bearing in mind the final obviously would be a best of 5, can KT win LCK?
I think it's very unlikely, but if they have enough diverse strategies, and KT can be surprising, like with the Malzahar pick, or like the fact that SKT had to ban the Zillion against them, which is a pocket ban that nobody else plays. And when you don't ban Zillion, they just play Zillion Poppy every game. And there's never any contest over the Zillion because nobody else wants it. So you can't take it away from them because no one else plays it. But they've got so much experience and being effective on this composition that you can't just straight up ignore it or anything like that either.
My big concern in terms of KT is And I think they can, surely, I think they can beat SKT. I think it'll be a great series. But I actually feel like if you want the best final, you probably want it to be SKT versus Rocks Tigers, because I think SKT at least has more firepower. Like, they have some sick individual
I don't
players.
know, but at the same time, like, KT beat Rocks, and SKT did not.
Sure.
So...
But the thing is, it feels like the ceiling for KT is more obvious, whereas Rocks has SKT rather has the TSM quality, where it's like, okay, they haven't figured it all out yet, but if they ever do, some of their players are very, very good, so you can win games off that, you know.
Yeah, you definitely make a good point.
Still pretty likely Rocks is just going to win the whole season. I have to say, Monty...
Well, as long as they move away from... I think that where Rocks is tripped up is that they don't play enough of these tank top laners, and it's not like Smeb can't play them, and it's not like they don't have the tools with Prey and Peanut to carry these games, but I think sometimes they overemphasize damage threats, and they end up with too many, and that leads to these scary situations where you start to wonder if they're going to lose a game because they're so squishy and susceptible to being picked off. So I haven't liked that from Rocks in some of their games. Okay.
So I actually have a question for you. So one of the unique qualities of this playoffs is that blind pick is gone. Now, So as a result, I want to know for the teams, like, which ones do you think that will help? Because I'll tell you one thing, by the way. That's one thing where if you're the Rocks Tigers, you're like, really? No blind pick this time? Because if they had blind pick, mate, that would be over already. They would never lose a blind pick game, dude. Look at the champions they could pick for their team.
I think it
wouldn't matter what you pick; they would just pick all their champions, right?
A blind pick game, because when you get them on like all of their strongest champions, I said this about Fnatic in the first round of the LCS playoffs, whereas like this composition is a Rocks Tigers wet dream. It's like Poppy, Kindred, Lysandra, Sivir, Alistar, or something like that. I'm like, no one in their right mind would ever give the Rocks Tigers this composition. You would have to be absolutely insane. But they got it. And that's you give them something, you give the Tigers something like that, and you got to be really worried about what's going to happen to you.
So which teams in the playoffs do you think that the lack of blind pick will like benefit or hurt? Or who do you think Theorycraft it could help out?
That's a really interesting question. I think it will help KT because they excel at some of like Fly's counter picks, or having some weird selections in the draft that throw you a little bit off balance. I think it will hurt. I think it would hurt the Tigers. I think it's probably neutral for SK Telecom. I think it will hurt the Afreeca Freecs, who sometimes want to get Mickey on like Twisted Fate, and they'll blind pick it anyway. So he feels pretty comfortable into a variety of matchups, it seems, with that champion. So you probably should think that they might do a little bit better if that was the case for Mickey.
Okay. Right. Is there any like last topic that we have to discuss about LCK before we wrap it?
No. I think that like is a pretty good rundown of a lot of the teams coming into the playoff matches. Should be really exciting this week. Hopefully Jin puts up a fight, but if they don't, every match beyond that should be super good.
I mean, especially because if Afreeca has peaked towards the end of the split like this and they're showing all this exciting potential, well, I mean, they've just got like a murderer's row when it gets to like SK Telecom, KT, Rocks. If they can win, then fair play. You've got to just tip your hat at that point in time. You just better, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be really exciting.
And obviously, we've got the potential of the Telecom Wars as the equivalent of the semi-finals. Obviously, only a round 3 match. There's no other semi-final. But the equivalent of the semi-final to decide who plays Rocks. Okay, right, that's the end of the episode. I'll pretty much stop it there.